He had $7.43 left in the world, a sick little girl burning with fever in the next room, and an eviction notice taped to his front door like a brand of shame. And somehow, that still wasn't the worst thing that happened to Cole Harrison that night. If you've ever wondered what it looks like when a man has absolutely nothing left to lose, stay with me, because what happens next will change the way you think about sacrifice, power, and what real justice actually costs. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and let's begin. The snow started falling around 4 in the afternoon, which in mid-December in Cleveland meant the city had maybe 2 hours before the roads became genuinely dangerous. By 6 o'clock, they were impassable. By 8, the weatherman on Channel 5 was using words like historic and once in a generation with the barely concealed excitement of a man who had never personally had to drive in it. Cole Harrison was not excited. He stood at the window of his third-floor apartment on Mercer Street, watching the snow pile against the base of the streetlights, and did the math in his head for the 4th time in an hour. The math never changed, no matter how many times he ran it. $43 in his checking account, $7 in his wallet. Rent was 9 days past due, and the landlord, a heavyset man named Gerald Briggs, who wore the same brown corduroy jacket every single time Cole saw him, had already stopped accepting apologies. The eviction notice stapled to the door wasn't a warning anymore. It was a countdown. But the rent wasn't what kept Cole at that window. What kept him there was the sound coming from the bedroom at the end of the hall. The soft, labored breathing of his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, who had been running a fever for 6 days and whose prescription had run out 2 days ago because the refill cost $212 that Cole did not have. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass. The pharmacy had been sympathetic. Maria, the pharmacist with the reading glasses always perched on top of her head, had looked at him with genuine sadness when he'd stood at the counter that morning and quietly explained his situation. She'd called her manager. The manager had called corporate. Corporate had a policy. The policy did not care about Lily Harrison's labored breathing at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night in December. "I'm sorry," Maria had said, and Cole believed she meant it. "I really am." He'd driven home with the empty prescription bag still in his jacket pocket. He didn't know why he'd kept it. Maybe because throwing it away felt like giving up, and Cole Harrison had not yet learned how to do that. He turned away from the window and walked down the hall to check on Lily. She was small in the bed. Too small, he always thought, for how large her personality was during the hours she felt well. She had her mother's dark hair spread out across the pillow like ink, and her own particular way of sleeping with one arm thrown over her face as if defending against something in a dream. The fever had brought color to her cheeks that would have looked healthy on any other face. On hers, right now, it just looked wrong. Cole sat on the edge of the mattress and placed the back of his hand against her forehead. Still hot. Not worse than this morning, maybe. Not better either. "Hey, Bug," he said quietly, even though she was asleep. She didn't stir. He pulled the blanket up to her chin, sat there another minute longer than he needed to, then went back to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator out of habit. Half a loaf of bread, some butter, 2 eggs, a juice box he'd been saving for Lily. He closed the refrigerator and stood in the kitchen in the dark for a while, not really thinking, just existing in the specific exhaustion of a man who has been treading water so long he's forgotten what standing on solid ground felt like. His phone buzzed on the counter. He picked it up, expecting nothing good, and got nothing good. A text from a number he didn't recognize, which turned out to be a notification from his bank informing him that his account balance had dropped to $31 after an automatic payment he'd forgotten about had processed. Just like that. Like the universe was paying close attention and wanted to make sure it hadn't missed an opportunity to kick him. Cole set the phone face down on the counter. He'd lost his job at Kendrick Freight 11 months ago, when the company had been acquired and his entire logistics department had been restructured, which was the corporate word for eliminated. He'd found work since then, some of it, day labor mostly, a 2-month contract position that had dried up in October, a weekend gig driving for a delivery service that had paid slightly less than he'd calculated after factoring in gas and wear on his truck. He was not, by any definition, a man who sat still and waited for things to improve. He applied for jobs the way other people breathed. He showed up early when he got them. He never complained, or at least he tried not to. It just hadn't been enough. Not for the rent, not for the pharmacy, not for the gap between what a man could do and what the world required of him. He was still standing in the kitchen when he heard it. At first he thought it was the wind. The storm had been producing some genuinely alarming sounds all evening, the kind of deep structural groaning that made older buildings feel less permanent than they were supposed to feel. But this was different. This was a sound from outside and below, something that didn't fit the rhythm of wind and snow. A heavy impact followed by a kind of silence that felt unnatural. Cole went back to the window. Mercer Street was completely empty. No cars moving, no pedestrians, nothing. The snow had erased the road's edges so that the whole block looked like one continuous white surface broken only by the dim orange circles cast by the streetlights. Nothing moved. He almost turned away. Then he saw it. About a block and a half north, where Mercer curved slightly before meeting the old Carver Bridge overpass, he could just barely make out something that didn't belong. A shape, dark and large, that hadn't been there when he'd looked 20 minutes ago. He squinted. The snow made everything soft and imprecise. He put his face closer to the glass. A vehicle. On its side, partially over the guardrail where the street curved above the drainage ravine that ran behind the Carver Bridge. The headlights were still on, throwing two pale beams upward at odd angles into the falling snow. "Come on," Cole said to no one in particular. He grabbed his coat, a heavy canvas work jacket that was warm but not warm enough for tonight, not really, and his boots, and he stopped at the bedroom door to listen. Lily's breathing was slow and steady. Sleeping. He grabbed the spare key off the hook by the door and wrote a note in case she woke up the way he always did when he had to leave her, and he put the note on her nightstand. "Back soon. Don't worry, love, Dad. Dad." He'd written that note more times than he wanted to count. Outside, the cold hit him like something physical, like a wall he had to push through. The temperature had dropped to around 9 degrees and the wind was coming off the lake in sustained gusts that made his eyes water immediately. The snow was mid-calf deep in the unshoveled stretches between the cleared paths, which meant that about 80% of his walk to the vehicle was mid-calf deep because nobody had been out shoveling tonight. Nobody sane was outside at all. He walked fast, head down, hands jammed in his pockets. The vehicle was worse than it had looked from the window. It was a large black SUV, the kind that cost more than Cole had made in the last 3 years combined, and it had gone through the guardrail on the curve, skidded sideways, and come to rest with its passenger side down against the frozen slope of the ravine. The driver's side was facing up, and the driver's side window was intact, which Cole took as a good sign until he got close enough to look in and realized the driver was not moving. He grabbed the door handle. Locked. "Hey!" He slapped the window hard. "Hey, can you hear me?" Nothing. He looked around for something to break the glass with and found a chunk of broken guardrail concrete half buried in the snow nearby. He picked it up, turned his face away, and swung it. The window didn't break cleanly the way windows did in movies. It cracked into a dense spiderweb pattern, and then Cole had to hit it twice more before it finally gave way, and he cut his forearm on a piece of the frame climbing in, not deeply, but enough that he could feel the warmth of blood against the cold of his skin. The driver was a woman. That was the first thing he registered. She was young, younger than he'd expected somehow, maybe around his age, and she was unconscious, slumped against the door below him with her seatbelt still on. She had a cut on her forehead that had bled enough to be alarming, and her face was chalk pale in the ambient light of the dashboard, which was still glowing, informing Cole in crisp digital text that the cabin temperature was 58 degrees and dropping. He pressed 2 fingers to the side of her neck. A pulse. Steady enough, not weak. "Okay," he said. "Okay." He tried his phone. No signal. The storm had knocked out service in this area earlier in the evening, and it hadn't come back. He looked around for her phone, found it on the floor of the passenger side, screen cracked completely black. He tried to turn it on. Nothing. He looked down at the woman. She was wearing a dark overcoat that looked expensive even to Cole's untrained eye, the kind of coat that had weight to it, that was cut precisely, that did not come from the clearance rack at anywhere. Her shoes, he noticed absurdly, were heeled and clearly not intended for winter weather. There was a leather bag somewhere in the wreckage of the interior. He could see the corner of it beneath a pile of papers that had scattered from somewhere. None of that mattered. What mattered was that she was unconscious, alone, in a vehicle lying sideways in a ravine, in 9-degree weather, in a blizzard, with no working phone and no help coming. Getting her out of the vehicle was harder than Cole had anticipated. She wasn't a small woman, not heavy, but not slight either, and the physics of extracting a dead weight from an awkward angle while managing not to slip on the icy surface of the vehicle's interior was genuinely unpleasant work. He got her seatbelt unclipped. She made a sound when he moved her. Not words, just a low sound. The involuntary vocalization of someone whose body registers pain even when consciousness has checked out. "I've got you," Cole said. "I've got you. Just stay still." He maneuvered her toward the broken window, protecting her head as best he could, and managed to get her upper body out first, then work the rest of her through. She was heavier outside the vehicle in the wind, or maybe he was just starting to feel the cold. His jacket was not enough. He'd known that before he left the apartment, and he'd gone anyway. He got his arms under her and lifted her. She made the sound again, and this time Cole could hear something in it. Not just pain, but something almost like trying, like some part of her was attempting to surface. Her hand, he noticed, had closed loosely around the lapel of his jacket. He started walking. The 3-block walk back to the apartment building was the longest walk of Cole Harrison's life. Not because of the distance. 3 blocks was nothing. He'd walked 3 blocks 1,000 times. But because of everything that was working against him simultaneously. The snow was deeper in places than he'd realized, and carrying her weight off-center made every step in deep snow a small crisis of balance. The wind came in the kind of gust that genuinely stopped forward progress for 2 or 3 seconds at a time. His arms started shaking from cold and exertion somewhere around the first block. By the second block, his fingers had gone numb enough that he had to redistribute his grip twice because he couldn't feel whether he was holding her securely. He did not put her down. There was a moment about halfway through the second block when his left foot caught the edge of something hidden under the snow. A curb, maybe, or a piece of broken pavement, and he stumbled badly, went down to one knee, and came very close to dropping her. He didn't. He righted himself with a sound that was partly a grunt and partly something he'd be embarrassed about if anyone had heard it, and he kept going. By the time he got to the building's front door, he was sweating inside his jacket despite the cold, which was the kind of thing that could get a person into trouble quickly in these temperatures. He got the door open. It didn't lock, which under other circumstances was one of his low-grade ongoing complaints about the building, and got inside. The lobby of 1740 Mercer Street was not warm exactly, but it was out of the wind, and compared to outside it felt tropical. Cole stood in the lobby for a moment and just breathed. The woman in his arms was still unconscious, still pale, still making that loose fist in the fabric of his jacket. He took the stairs. The elevator had been broken for 6 weeks, and Gerald Briggs had been working on it, and got to the 3rd floor and got his apartment door open. He laid her on the couch. His couch was old and slightly sunken on one side, and covered in a blanket that had been washed so many times the original color was a matter of some debate. He covered her with it anyway, and went to get another blanket from the closet. He got a kitchen towel and wetted it, and went to work on the cut on her forehead, which had bled freely but wasn't deep enough to require stitches, he thought, hoped, though he was very aware that he had no medical training and could be wrong. She stirred when he pressed the cloth to her forehead. "Hey," he said. "Hey, can you hear me?" Her eyelids moved, opened a fraction. He could see her eyes trying to focus. Dark eyes, he noticed, brown or very dark green. It was hard to tell in the apartment's weak overhead light. And then closing again. "You were in an accident," Cole said, keeping his voice even. "You're in my apartment. You're safe. I'm going to try to get you some help as soon as the phones come back up." No response. But her breathing was more regular now, less shallow than it had been in the car. He went and checked on Lily, still sleeping. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at his daughter, and tried to organize his thoughts. He had a stranger on his couch, an injured stranger, unconscious, with no identification that he could see, no working phone, and no way to contact anyone on her behalf because his own phone still had no signal, and the landline he'd been meaning to cancel for 2 years now had been disconnected in October. when he'd had to make a choice between it and the gas bill. What he had was 2 blankets, a first aid kit from the dollar store that had bandages and antiseptic and not much else, some ibuprofen, a kettle, and the specific competence of a man who had been handling problems alone for long enough that panic had become somewhat impractical. He started with the first aid kit. The cut on her forehead was about 2 inches long, horizontal, just below her hairline. Head wounds bled dramatically. He knew that much. And this one had, but the bleeding had slowed considerably by the time he cleaned it with the antiseptic wipes and applied 2 of the butterfly bandages from the kit. She flinched when he pressed the second one into place, and he apologized out loud before he could stop himself. "Sorry, almost done." He checked her arms and hands for other injuries. Some bruising developing on her left arm, probably from the impact. Nothing obviously broken, though again he was aware of the limits of his assessment. Her breathing stayed regular. Her color improved slightly as the apartment's warmth reached her. Around midnight, she woke up. Not gradually. One moment she was unconscious, and the next moment she opened her eyes and looked directly at the ceiling of Cole's apartment with an expression of complete, focused alertness that would have impressed Cole under different circumstances. Then the alertness fractured into confusion, and the confusion into something sharper, more guarded, and she pushed herself upright on the couch, too fast, clearly, because she grabbed the armrest immediately and her face went tight with pain. "Don't sit up that fast," Cole said, from the kitchen, where he'd been heating water. "You hit your head pretty hard." She looked at him. He was aware of what he looked like. A large man in a worn canvas jacket with a cut on his forearm that had dried to a dark brown line, standing in a small kitchen in a small apartment that made no attempt to be anything other than what it was. He understood that this was not a reassuring tableau for a woman who had just regained consciousness in a stranger's home. "You were in an accident," he said, the same words he'd said before. "On Mercer Street, about a block and a half from the Carver Bridge. Your car went through the guardrail into the ravine. I saw it from my window, and I went and got you out." He paused. "I wasn't able to reach emergency services. Phones are down, and it's pretty bad out there. I'm trying to get help." She was still looking at him with that guarded, measuring expression. "What's your name?" she asked. Her voice was steadier than he expected. A little raw, maybe, but controlled. "Cole Harrison." "How long have I been here?" "About 2 hours." She looked around the apartment. Taking inventory, he realized, the kind of systematic visual assessment of an unfamiliar space that wasn't curiosity, but caution. She was, he thought, trying to determine how much trouble she was in. He found that he didn't resent the caution. Under the circumstances, it seemed reasonable. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "I know that's exactly what someone who was going to hurt you would say, but I'm not." Something shifted in her expression. Not full trust, not anywhere near trust, but maybe a reduction in the sharpest edge of her alertness. "Is there anyone I can try to contact for you?" Cole asked. "Once the phones come back." She paused. "Yes. I'll need to make some calls." "Sure. As soon as I get signal, I'll hand you my phone." He set a mug of hot water on the coffee table in front of her, along with a tea bag from the box he kept mostly for Lily. "It's not much, but it'll warm you up." She looked at the mug, then at him. "Thank you," she said, and the words had a quality that suggested she didn't use them automatically, didn't deploy them as social lubrication. She meant them specifically. "Don't mention it," Cole said. He went back to the kitchen, and she wrapped both hands around the mug, and neither of them spoke for a while. From the end of the hall came the small, steady sound of Lily breathing in her sleep, and the storm pushed hard against the windows, and for the moment, that was all there was. Cole stood at the kitchen counter and looked at the empty prescription bag that was still sitting where he'd set it this morning, which already felt like it belonged to a different week. He thought about the $31 in his account. He thought about Gerald Briggs and the brown corduroy jacket and the eviction notice on his door, which was still on his door, which had not gone anywhere. Then he thought about the fact that if he'd been standing 2 feet to the left of where he'd been standing when he'd looked out the window, he probably wouldn't have seen the headlights at all. The angle would have been wrong. She'd have been in that ravine until morning, and 9 degrees overnight in a blizzard was not a sentence anyone survived. He washed his hands at the kitchen sink and dried them on the dish towel and went to check on Lily again. She was still sleeping. Her breathing was still the same, Still that slightly labored quality that kept him from ever fully sleeping himself, the sound of a problem he could not fix with effort or willpower or showing up early or staying late. The medication she needed was in a pharmacy a mile and a half away, and it cost $212, and Cole had 31. He sat on the edge of her bed in the dark for a while. Out in the living room, the stranger he'd pulled from a frozen ravine in the middle of a blizzard sat on his sunken couch with her hands around a mug of hot water, and the snow kept falling, and the city outside went on being buried, and Cole Harrison sat with his daughter in the dark and tried to think about nothing at all, which was something he'd never been particularly good at. After a while, Lily shifted in her sleep and said something that wasn't quite a word. "I'm here, Bug," Cole said quietly. "Go back to sleep." She settled. He sat there until he was sure she was deeply under, and then he got up and went back to the living room. The woman on his couch had fallen asleep again. Real sleep this time. Not unconsciousness, her posture slightly different, less collapsed. The mug was on the coffee table, half empty. One of the blankets had slipped, and Cole picked it up carefully and draped it back over her without waking her. He turned off the overhead light, leaving just the small lamp by the kitchen, and sat in the chair across from the couch, with his jacket still on because the apartment's heat was inconsistent at best, and he was still a little chilled from outside. He was tired. He was tired in a way that went considerably deeper than one sleepless night. On the coffee table next to the mug, he noticed something that had fallen from her coat pocket. A card, or part of one, the kind of heavy matte stock that expensive business cards were printed on. He leaned forward and looked at it without picking it up. He couldn't make out the full name in the low light, but he could see part of a logo. Angular, minimalist, the kind of design that communicated without explaining itself. And 2 words above what might have been a phone number. Sterling Corporation. He didn't know the name. Didn't mean anything to him. He leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes, not intending to sleep, just resting them for a minute. Outside, the blizzard that the weatherman had called historic kept doing what it was doing. The snow piled against the base of the streetlights. The wind worked at the window frames. The city got quieter and quieter as even the most stubborn holdouts finally gave up and went inside. Cole Harrison sat in his chair and did not sleep and did not give up, because those were the 2 things he seemed to be constitutionally incapable of doing. The night got longer, the way nights like that always do. Not quickly, not mercifully, but in the slow, grinding way that tests a person's relationship with hope. And the woman on his couch breathed in and out, steadily, in the particular reliable rhythm of someone who didn't know yet how close they'd come to not breathing at all. He didn't mean to fall asleep in the chair, but somewhere around 3 in the morning, his body made a unilateral decision and he was gone. Not deeply, not restfully, but that thin gray kind of sleep where you're still half aware of every sound, and your neck is going to hurt in the morning, and you dream in fragments that don't connect into anything meaningful. He woke at 5:47 to the sound of Lily coughing. Cole was on his feet before he was fully conscious, moving down the hall on muscle memory, and he got to her doorway and saw her sitting up in bed with her dark hair tangled and her eyes still mostly closed. The kind of half-awake coughing fit that scared him every time, even though he'd seen it a dozen times now. He went in and sat beside her and put his hand on her back and said the things you say. "It's okay. I'm here. Just breathe." And after a minute or so it passed and she slumped against him, warm and heavy with fever. "Thirsty," she said. "I know. I'll get you some water." "Is someone in our living room?" Cole paused. He'd forgotten, in the 3 seconds between sleeping and waking, that there was a stranger on his couch. "Yeah. A lady got hurt last night. She's sleeping." Lily processed this with the particular seriousness of a 7-year-old encountering new information. "What happened to her?" "Car accident. She's okay, just resting." "Does she need anything?" Even sick, even at 5:47 in the morning, Lily Harrison's first instinct was to ask if someone else needed something. Cole didn't know where she'd gotten that from. Her mother had been generous, but she'd left when Lily was 3, and Cole didn't think he was particularly generous. He was just a man who did what needed to be done. But Lily had this quality that went beyond anything he could account for. "She's fine, Bug. Let me get you some water." When he came back with the water, Lily drank most of it without stopping and then lay back against her pillow and was asleep again in under 2 minutes. Cole stood in the doorway watching her for a while, doing the thing he did every morning now, measuring her breathing, checking the color in her face, running the calculation of whether today was better or worse than yesterday. Today was about the same. That was something, he supposed. He went back to the living room. Victoria Sterling was awake. She was sitting up on the couch, not quite the way she'd been sitting up the night before, not with that sharp, guarded alertness, but with the slightly unmoored look of someone who had slept in an unfamiliar place and needed a few seconds to reconstruct where they were and why. The blanket was folded on the cushion beside her, which struck Cole as oddly formal. She'd folded the blanket. She looked at him. "How's your head?" he asked. "It hurts." She said it plainly, without complaint in her voice, just as information. "But I can think clearly, which I understand is the relevant question after a head injury." "Can you tell me what year it is? Who's the president?" She told him both correctly. "Good enough for me," he said, and went to put the kettle on. She watched him move around the small kitchen, and Cole was aware of the watching but didn't let it bother him. He'd been looked at before by people trying to figure out whether he was trustworthy. He understood it wasn't personal. "My name is Victoria," she said. "Victoria S." She stopped, just briefly, just a half second, but he caught it. "Victoria, that's enough for now, I think." Cole considered this. It was, objectively, a strange thing to say. But there was nothing about the situation that wasn't strange, and he wasn't going to push her for information she didn't want to give. "Okay," he said. "Victoria, you said the phones were down." "Mine still doesn't have signal. You can try it." He handed her his phone across the kitchen counter. She looked at the screen. He saw her note the cracked corner, the case that was held together with a strip of electrical tape, and tried to dial. Nothing. She handed it back. "The storm should clear today," Cole said. "According to the forecast from yesterday, anyway. We'll get you connected as soon as we can." "Thank you." There was that particular quality to it again, that specificity. Then she said, "I heard a child coughing." "My daughter, Lily. She's 7. Is she all right?" Cole set 2 mugs on the counter. "She's been sick. She'll be okay." The way he said it, not looking at her when he said it, keeping his voice level in the particular way that meant the sentence was covering something more complicated, apparently communicated more than he intended, because Victoria didn't push it further, but he could feel her attention shift slightly, land on something, and stay there. He brought her a mug of coffee. Real coffee, not instant, because he'd been hoarding a half bag of ground coffee for situations that required it, and this seemed to qualify. She took it with both hands, the same way she'd held the mug of hot water the night before. "You don't have to keep feeding me," she said. "It's coffee," Cole said. "It's not a thing." She almost smiled. It was a small thing, more like the idea of a smile than the actual execution of one, but it was there. "You're a very matter-of-fact person." "I don't know what else to be," he said, which was honest. He sat in the chair across from her and drank his own coffee, and for a few minutes they existed in the same space without talking, which wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but had a certain density to it. 2 people who knew almost nothing about each other, sharing a morning in a small apartment while a blizzard finished making its point outside. Victoria looked at the window. At the snow still coming down, thinner now, less violent. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Okay." "I wasn't just driving through. I was coming from a meeting, a dinner, actually, on the other side of the city. I usually have a driver." She stopped, seemed to be deciding how much to say. "I wanted to drive myself last night. It felt important to drive myself." She shook her head slightly, and the motion seemed to cost her because she pressed 2 fingers to her temple. That was clearly a poor decision. "Roads were bad even before the storm got bad," Cole said. "Could have happened to anyone." "That's kind of you." "Also accurate." She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Do you always do that?" "Do what?" "Find the version of events that's least blaming toward other people." Cole thought about it. "Not always," he said. "Some people earn the blame." He set his mug down. "You just drove in a blizzard and lost control. That's not a character failing, it's physics." Victoria was quiet for a moment. Most people would be asking me a lot more questions by now, she said. Who I am, what I was doing, what kind of car that was. I figured you'd tell me what I needed to know when you needed to tell me, Cole said. And what kind of car it is doesn't matter. She looked at him. He got the impression, again, of someone running a very fast internal calculation, weighing, measuring, not mistrustfully, but carefully. He got the impression this was how she operated in general, that nothing she did was entirely unconsidered. Is there something I can do? She asked. While I'm here. To help. You can rest, Cole said. You had a head injury last night. I'm serious. So am I. She made a sound that was somewhere between a sigh and a small laugh. I'm not good at sitting still. I noticed. He got up to check on Lily again, and when he came back, Victoria had moved from the couch to the kitchen table, was sitting with her coffee mug and looking at nothing in particular. The change of position seemed deliberate. Moving from the couch to a chair at a table was, he supposed, a way of feeling less like a patient and more like a person. He didn't comment on it. Around 7:30, Lily appeared in the hallway. She was wearing the oversized sleep shirt she'd been wearing since she got sick. It had a faded cartoon bear on the front, and it was technically Cole's shirt from about 12 years ago, cut down. And her dark hair was spectacularly tangled, and she was carrying the stuffed elephant she'd had since she was 2 and named, with considerable 7-year-old decisiveness, Gerald. Cole had never told her that was also the name of their landlord. It seemed like information that could wait. Lily stopped at the entrance to the kitchen and looked at Victoria with the frank, total attention of a child who had not yet learned that staring was considered impolite. Victoria looked back at her. You have a bandage on your forehead, Lily said. I do, Victoria agreed. My dad put it on? He did. Lily considered this. He's good at that. He put 14 stitches on my knee one time with the first aid kit. She paused. They weren't real stitches, they were the sticky kind, but he put them on very straight. Your father seems to be good at a number of things, Victoria said, and there was something in her tone that wasn't quite humor, but was adjacent to it. I'm Lily. I'm Victoria. Lily came the rest of the way into the kitchen and climbed into her usual chair and set Gerald the elephant on the table in front of her. Are you going to stay with us? Just until the phones come back and I can reach some people, Victoria said. Then I'll get out of your way. You're not in the way, Lily said with simple conviction, and then looked at her father. Can I have toast? Cole made toast. He made it for all 3 of them, which felt slightly absurd under the circumstances, but Lily had insisted, in the politely implacable way she had, that Victoria should have some too, and Victoria had accepted one piece with the slight uncertainty of someone not accustomed to being in a situation where the hospitality was modest but genuine. The 3 of them sat at the kitchen table in the thin winter morning light and ate toast. Victoria watched Lily when she thought Cole wasn't watching her back. He was. He watched the way Victoria looked at his daughter, not with pity, not with the particular discomfort some adults had around sick children, but with something that looked more like paying attention, like Lily was someone worth watching. Lily, for her part, took approximately 20 minutes to get from polite conversation to telling Victoria about a book she was reading, a fact she'd learned about elephants, and a detailed account of a disagreement she'd had with a boy in her class named Marcus, who had, in Lily's estimation, no understanding of the rules of a game she'd been trying to explain to him. You sound very patient, Victoria said. I'm not, Lily said. I was very annoyed, but I didn't yell because yelling doesn't fix things. She looked at her father. Right, Dad? Right, Cole said. Dad says if you're going to be upset about something, you should be upset about it and then figure out what to do next. Victoria looked at Cole over the top of Lily's head, and Cole looked back at her, and he had the oddly exposed feeling of someone who has been quoted by their child and is realizing for the first time that they've been listened to more carefully than they knew. Around 10 in the morning, he had to ask Victoria to move back to the couch. Not because he wanted her off the kitchen table, but because he needed the table to spread out the paperwork that had been accumulating for weeks. The notices, the bills, the things he dealt with one at a time in the specific order they couldn't be ignored any longer. He'd been putting this particular session off, but Lily had gone back to sleep and he needed to make some decisions. or at least make the honest list of what the decisions were going to have to be. "Sorry," he said. "I just need the table for a bit." "Of course." Victoria moved back to the couch without comment. He spread the papers out. He didn't think about the fact that there was a stranger in the room. He thought about the numbers, the way he always did, trying to find an angle he hadn't tried yet, a combination that worked, some version of arithmetic that came out differently than it had the last 40 times. The eviction notice was on top. He set it aside. Then the utility bills, gas, electric. Then the medical bills. 3 separate statements from Lily's last 2 hospital visits, each with the increasingly firm language of invoices that have been ignored long enough to start feeling personal about it. Then the letter from the mortgage servicer, which wasn't his mortgage. He didn't own anything, never had, but was his landlord's, apparently, because it had come to his address by mistake 2 months ago, and he'd given it to Gerald Briggs. And Briggs had gone pale and quiet, and 3 days later the eviction notice had appeared on Cole's door. He'd made the connection. He wasn't stupid. He was deep in the papers, pencil in hand, making notes on the back of an envelope the way he always did, when he heard Victoria get up from the couch. He didn't look up. She walked toward the kitchen, and he assumed she was getting more coffee. But then he heard her stop. He looked up. She was standing at the edge of the kitchen table, not near him, not reaching for anything. She was looking at the papers, not reading them exactly, or not intentionally, but she was close enough that she could see the letterheads, the amounts in red text, the names on the forms. He started to say something. She turned away first, toward the coffee maker, and her face was arranged very carefully into neutrality. He watched her pour herself coffee with steady hands. She didn't look at the papers again. He looked back down at his envelope. The storm wound down by noon. The snow stopped. The wind dropped. The particular silence that follows a major snowfall settled over the city, that muffled, padded quiet where every sound seemed to come from slightly farther away than it actually was. His phone found signal at 12:22. "Signal's back," he said. Victoria was across the room immediately. He handed her the phone and she dialed from memory. A long number, not a saved contact, and turned slightly away from him out of what he understood was not rudeness, but the reflex of a person accustomed to privacy. He went to check on Lily. He could hear Victoria's voice from the hallway, low, controlled, and different from how she'd been speaking all morning. Not warmer exactly, more precise, like someone shifting into a register they used for work. He heard fragments, "I'm safe," and "Don't bring anyone," and "No, I said don't." And then her voice dropped below the threshold of what he could hear. When he came back to the living room, she was handing him his phone. "Thank you," she said. Third time she'd said it, and each time it had that same quality, intentional, specific. "Everything okay?" "Yes." She paused. "There are people who will come when the road's clear, probably later this afternoon." She looked at him with that measuring quality again, the fast internal calculation. "I should tell you something while I have the time to tell it properly." Cole waited. "I haven't been entirely honest about who I am," she said. "I know," Cole said. She looked surprised, just slightly. "You know, there was a business card on the table last night, fell out of your coat. I couldn't read the whole thing, but I saw Sterling Corp." He paused. "I didn't look it up or anything. My phone didn't have signal, but the name's been in the news enough that I've heard it." Victoria was very still. Sterling Corporation. He'd heard the name in the way you heard names in the background of the news you caught while cooking dinner or waiting at the pharmacy. Not detailed, not specific, just a fixture of the landscape, the kind of corporate entity large enough to show up in headlines without him ever having occasion to care about what it specifically did. Logistics, real estate, finance, the kind of company that was a fact of the world rather than a thing you thought about. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Since about 1 a.m, Cole said. "Roughly when I sat down to sleep and couldn't." He picked up his coffee mug, found it empty, set it back down. "Didn't change anything. You were still hurt and the storm was still outside." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. "Most people," she said slowly, "would have reacted differently to that information." "Maybe," Cole said. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it. You're a person who got hurt in a car accident. What you run doesn't change that. Something moved across her face. Not the calculation this time, something less controlled. It passed quickly. She sat down at the kitchen table. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat too. I want to explain something, she said, and I want you to let me finish before you respond. All right. Sterling Corporation has a real estate subsidiary, Sturco Properties. She said it the way you said something you'd said 10,000 times in professional settings, the corporate shorthand that rolls off the tongue automatically. Then she seemed to hear herself say it and slowed down. They've been acquiring and redeveloping residential properties in the Lakeside District for the past 18 months. It was a project I approved. Large-scale residential conversion, mixed-use development. She stopped. I reviewed the business case. The numbers were good. The board was pleased. I signed off on it and moved on to the next thing. Cole waited. The eviction notices, Victoria said. She looked at the papers still spread across his table. The ones in Lakeside. Do you know the ones I mean? Cole felt something shift in his chest, something that wasn't quite an emotion yet. I know them, he said. His voice came out flat. The one on your door, she said. Is it from your company? It wasn't a question, the way he said it. He already knew. Somewhere in the hour after he'd seen the card on the coffee table, in the part of his brain that never fully stopped working even when he told it to, he'd put that together too. Victoria held his gaze. Yes. The word sat between them like a dropped object. Cole didn't say anything. He looked at the table. At the eviction notice he'd put to the side of the pile, slightly to the right, as if distance from the center made it less central to his life. He picked it up and looked at the letterhead. Sturco Properties, LLC. He'd read it probably 30 times and processed the corporate name without it attaching itself to anything larger. It was just the name on the paper that was going to take his home. I didn't know about this specific property, Victoria said. Her voice was careful but not apologetic. Not yet. She was still in the information stage, making sure he had what he needed. I didn't know about your address. I didn't know about Lily. She paused. I don't say that to minimize it. I say it because I think you should know the shape of what happened, and because... She stopped again. Because what? Cole said. Because last night, while you were in the kitchen, I looked at the papers on your table. She said it directly, not defensively. Not to pry. I saw them when I came for coffee, and I looked at them because the letterhead caught my eye, and She stopped. I needed to understand what I was looking at. Cole thought about the moment. Her standing at the edge of the table, that carefully neutral face, the steady hands on the coffee mug. He thought she was being polite. She'd been in shock. Okay, he said. Okay, she repeated, as if the word surprised her. What do you want to do about it? Cole asked. She blinked. What do I... You didn't come here and tell me this so I'd have the information and nothing would happen, Cole said. You came here and told me because you're trying to figure out what the right move is. So what is it? Something in her face shifted again. And this time it didn't pass quickly. It stayed, whatever it was, something between being seen clearly and being surprised by being seen clearly. I don't know yet, she said. I have to look at the full picture when I get back to the office. I have to understand the scope. She pressed her fingers against the edge of the table. But I'm not going to let this continue the way it is. That much I know. All right, Cole said. He got up and put his coffee mug in the sink. He stood at the sink with his back to her for a moment, looking at nothing, just needing a second. He wanted to be angry. There was anger somewhere in his system. He could feel it, the way you feel weather coming, a pressure in the chest that wanted to become something louder. This woman's name was on the paper that was going to make him and his sick daughter homeless. Her corporation had signed the notices, had processed the filings, had moved through his neighborhood and other neighborhoods like a machine that didn't see the people inside the buildings, just the buildings. But she'd also folded his blanket this morning. She'd talked to Lily about elephants. She'd sat at his kitchen table and told him the truth when she didn't have to. Cole Harrison had never had the luxury of dealing with things as simple as they were supposed to be, and he wasn't going to start now. He turned around. You should eat something real before your people get here. I've got eggs. Victoria looked at him. You're going to cook eggs. 2 of them. You want them or not? She was quiet for a second. Then, yes, please. He cooked eggs. She sat at his kitchen table and watched him do it without offering help or commentary, which he appreciated, and he put the plate in front of her and she ate it with the same focused attention she'd brought to everything else she'd done that morning. While she was eating, Lily appeared again in the hallway, dragging Gerald the elephant by one ear, announcing that she was thirsty and couldn't sleep anymore. Cole got her a glass of water, and she climbed into her chair at the table and sat there in the familiar way that made the table feel, as it always did when she was at it, like the center of the apartment. She looked at the mostly empty plate in front of Victoria and then at her father. "Did Dad make you eggs?" she asked. "He did. He makes good eggs," Lily said with proprietorial satisfaction. "He does," Victoria agreed, and there it was again, that almost smile, that thing that was more intention than execution. Lily set Gerald the elephant on the table and looked at Victoria with a 7-year-old's complete absence of social filter. "Are you rich?" she asked. "Lily," Cole started. "It's all right," Victoria said. She looked at Lily. "What makes you ask?" Lily shrugged. "Your coat is really nice, and you talk like people on TV." She paused, considering. "Not bad TV? Good TV?" Victoria took that in. "I have money, yes," she said, without the hesitation or the deflection that question usually generated in people who had significant amounts of it. Lily nodded as if this confirmed something. "My dad doesn't have very much money right now," she said, "but he's very good at things. He knows how to fix the heater, and he can read maps without a phone, and he carried you in the snow." She looked at her father briefly. "Right, Dad?" "I carried her," Cole confirmed. "That's a lot," Lily said to Victoria. "He carried you in the snow in a blizzard. That was probably very hard." Victoria set her fork down. She looked at Lily with the full weight of her attention, and then she looked at Cole, and whatever expression was on her face in that moment was not something Cole could classify neatly. It wasn't simple, whatever it was. It had layers. "It was a lot," Victoria said quietly. By 3 in the afternoon, the roads had been partially cleared and a large black vehicle appeared on Mercer Street. Different from the wrecked SUV, newer, moving with the careful deliberateness of a driver navigating post-storm pavement. It stopped in front of 1740 Mercer. Cole watched it from the window. Victoria had seen it too. She stood up from the couch and straightened her coat, the expensive dark coat, which had dried overnight draped over the back of the chair, and then stopped. She looked around the apartment. The blanket she'd folded, the mug on the coffee table, the kitchen table with the papers still spread across it. Lily was in the hallway. "Are you leaving?" she asked. "I have to go," Victoria said, "but—" She paused, reached into her coat pocket, produced a business card and held it out to Cole. He took it, read it. Victoria Sterling, Chief Executive Officer, Sterling Corporation. "Call me," she said, "when you need to." Cole turned the card over in his hand. He'd known her name since the small hours of the morning, but seeing it printed was different. It made it solid in a way that knowing hadn't. "I'll think about it," he said. She seemed to expect that, or something like it. She nodded once, the kind of nod that is actually an agreement to terms. Then she looked at Lily, who was standing in the hallway with Gerald the elephant under one arm, watching everything with dark, serious eyes. "It was very nice to meet you, Lily," Victoria said. "You too," Lily said. "I hope your head gets better." "Thank you." She turned and walked to the door. Cole opened it for her. She stepped into the hallway and then turned back once, just once, and looked at him with that full, direct quality, the calculation gone, replaced with something less defended. "Thank you for my life," she said. Not dramatically, just plainly. Cole nodded. She walked down the hall toward the stairs, and he stood in the open doorway and watched her go, and when she turned the corner, he closed the door. The apartment felt different after that. Not quieter. Lily was right there, already asking if she could have the rest of the juice box. But different. Like a room where a window had been open for a while and had just been closed, where the air pressure had equalized and everything was the same as it had been, but you could still feel the change. Cole picked up his daughter and held her, which was harder than it used to be because she was getting bigger, but she didn't protest. She put her head on his shoulder and brought Gerald the elephant between them and sighed the specific sigh of a tired 7-year-old who felt, for now, safe. He stood there in the middle of the living room and held her. The business card was in his jacket pocket. He could feel the edge of it against his palm when he adjusted his grip. On the kitchen table, the eviction notice sat in its place to the side of the pile, slightly to the right, with Sturco Properties, LLC printed across the top in dark, clean type. Cole Harrison stood in his apartment with his daughter in his arms and said nothing, and thought plenty, and didn't know yet what came next, and held on. The card sat on his kitchen counter for 3 days. Cole didn't throw it away, and he didn't call the number on it, and he didn't think about it consciously, which was different from not thinking about it. It was there every morning when he made coffee, and every night when he turned off the kitchen light, this small rectangle of heavy matte stock with Victoria Sterling's name on it in clean dark type, and he developed the habit of setting things slightly to the left of it so it stayed visible without being the first thing he looked at. Lily noticed it on the second day. "Is that the lady's card?" "Yeah." "Are you going to call her?" "I don't know yet." Lily accepted this without commentary, which was one of the better qualities she'd developed at 7. She'd learned, mostly, to distinguish between the questions her father was still working through and the ones he'd already settled, and she'd learned not to push on the former. She'd gotten that from somewhere. Cole still wasn't sure where. The eviction notice had a response deadline of 14 days from posting, which meant he had 11 left when Victoria's car had pulled away from Mercer Street. He'd spent the 3 days since she left the way he'd spent most of the previous weeks, making calls, sending emails, filing whatever forms the city's housing assistance portal would accept, talking to a legal aid attorney named Dennis Park, who had an office above a laundromat on Prospect Avenue and was handling 11 similar cases simultaneously and doing what he could with that. The subsidiary filed correctly, Dennis had told him on the second day, the phone pressed between Cole's ear and shoulder while he stirred Lily's soup. Procedurally, they did everything right. That's the problem. If they'd made a mistake, we'd have somewhere to stand. So we don't have somewhere to stand. I didn't say that. I said the procedural angle's closed. Dennis paused. Cole could hear papers. There might be a zoning challenge. The redevelopment approval had a public comment period that was, let's say, shorter than it should have been. I'm looking at it. How long would that take? A pause that told Cole everything. Longer than 11 days. He'd hung up and finished making Lily's soup. The thing he kept not doing, the thing that sat in the back of his mind every time he looked at the card on the counter, was calling Victoria Sterling. He knew why he wasn't doing it. It was the same reason he'd refused every offer of charity in the past year with a politeness that Dennis Park had called, in a moment of candor, a little self-defeating. It wasn't pride exactly, or not only pride, it was something more structural than that. It was the knowledge that owing something to someone with that kind of power was its own form of being owned, and Cole Harrison had spent his adult life very carefully not being owned by anyone. But Lily's fever came back on the 3rd night. Not bad, not hospital bad, but bad enough that she was up twice coughing, bad enough that by 4 a.m. Cole was sitting on the bathroom floor with her, while she cried in the specific exhausted way of a sick child who is tired of being sick. And he was rubbing her back and saying the things you say, and the empty prescription bottle was on the bathroom shelf where it had been for a week, and the $31 in his account had become $22 after he'd bought groceries. At 7 the next morning, after Lily had finally gone back to sleep, Cole picked up the card. He stood at the kitchen counter and looked at it for about 30 seconds. Then he dialed. It rang twice. Then a voice, not Victoria's, a woman's voice, professional and neutral. "Victoria Sterling's office. This is Carla." "My name is Cole Harrison," Cole said. "I need to speak with Ms. Sterling. She told me to call." A pause. "May I ask the nature of your call?" "She'll know who I am," Cole said. "Cole Harrison, Mercer Street." Another pause. Longer. Then, "Please hold." He held. He listened to 30 seconds of nothing, and then the line clicked. Cole. Victoria's voice was different on the phone than it had been in his apartment. Crisper, more stripped down, the way voices were when you couldn't rely on expression to fill the gaps. But she'd said his name like she'd been expecting this call, or maybe like she'd been waiting for it. "Lily's fever came back," he said. He hadn't planned to lead with that. He'd planned to lead with something about the eviction, about the 14-day deadline, about Dennis Park and the procedural dead ends. But what came out was Lily. A beat of silence. How bad? Not hospital bad, but she needs the medication. The prescription ran out a week ago and the refill is… He stopped. This was the part he hated. This specific sentence in all its versions was the sentence he hated most. I can't cover it right now. What's the pharmacy? Victoria, I'm not calling so you can… What's the pharmacy, Cole? He closed his eyes, opened them. Ridgeline Pharmacy on Clark. The prescription's under Lily Harrison. It's $212. It'll be handled in the next hour, she said. What else? He almost said nothing. He almost said that was enough, that he'd figure out the rest. But he thought about Dennis Park and the zoning challenge that would take longer than 11 days, and he thought about Lily on the bathroom floor at 4 in the morning, and he said, I have 11 days before the eviction goes forward. I know, Victoria said, quietly. I've been looking at it. Then you know there's not much room. There's more to it than you know, she said. I need to talk to you in person, not on the phone. A pause. I can come to you, or you can come here, whichever you prefer. He thought about this. Going to Sterling Corporation's offices, he'd looked up the address the day after she left, out of something that was probably curiosity but felt more like due diligence. Meant going somewhere she controlled. Her coming to Mercer Street meant bringing whatever she'd found into his space, and he wasn't sure he was ready for that. Neither option was particularly comfortable. You come here, he said. This afternoon? Fine. She arrived at 2 o'clock with no visible security, just a car that dropped her at the curb and pulled around the corner, and Victoria herself at his door, in a coat that was not the expensive dark overcoat from the night of the accident, but still clearly not something purchased with much concern for price. She had the butterfly bandages off her forehead, leaving a thin healing line just below her hairline. She looked, he thought, like she hadn't been sleeping well either. She had a folder, not a tablet, not a laptop. A physical folder, the kind that held printed pages, which told Cole something about the nature of what she was bringing and the intention behind bringing it this way. He let her in. Lily was asleep. The medication had arrived at Ridgeline at 9:15. Cole had gotten a text from Maria, the pharmacist, who sounded surprised in the way people sounded when corporate authorizations showed up without the usual 48-hour lag. And Cole had gone and picked it up and gotten Lily's first dose in her by 10, and she'd been sleeping properly for the first time in days. Real sleep, not the fitful, half-conscious kind. The apartment was quiet in the good way. Victoria came in and looked around the apartment the way she had the first morning. Not with assessment this time, but with something more like recognition, the way you looked at a place you'd been before. They sat at the kitchen table. She opened the folder. I need to tell you what I found, she said, and some of it I should have found a long time ago, and I didn't, and I'm not going to make excuses for that. Cole nodded. She turned the first page toward him. It was a project overview, the Lakeside District Redevelopment Initiative, the Sturco Properties project that had generated his eviction notice, and he now knew the eviction notices of somewhere between 60 and 80 other families in the same area. He could see the approved budget, the timeline, the projected returns. All of it in clean corporate formatting. I approved this 14 months ago, Victoria said, based on a business case presented by the executive in charge of Sturco Properties. His name is Richard Hale. She said the name the way you said something that had recently turned unpleasant in your mouth. He's been at Sterling for 6 years. I trusted his judgment on the real estate side because that's his domain, and my attention was in other areas. That's generally how it works, Cole said. Not sarcastically, just stating the shape of the thing. Yes, she said. That's generally how it works. She turned another page. What I didn't know, what Hale's presentation very deliberately did not include, is that the redevelopment project was not simply a business decision. Hale had a financial stake in the outcome. She tapped the page. He had a private arrangement with 2 of the construction firms that were contracted for the development, profit-sharing agreements. The faster the properties were cleared and the faster construction began, the more money moved into accounts that had nothing to do with Sterling Corporation. Cole looked at the page. Numbers, names. The The kind of documentation that only existed because someone had gone looking for it and known where to look. "How did you find this?" he asked. "When I got back to the office," Victoria said, "I started pulling everything related to the Lakeside project. Full audit trail. At first I was looking at it from the humanitarian angle, trying to understand the scope of the displacement, how many families, what the timeline looked like." She paused. "The financial irregularities came up in the first week. After that I had our internal investigators on it, and then outside counsel, and then I had enough to take to the board." "What did the board say?" "They said to handle it quietly." Her voice was flat when she said this, the specific flatness of someone reporting something that made them angry. "They said minimize exposure and protect the brand, and two of them said the word optics more times in a single meeting than I've heard it in the past year combined." "But you're here," Cole said. "I'm here," she said. She turned another page, and this one was different from the rest. No corporate formatting, no letterheads, just a list, handwritten in what he assumed was her handwriting, tight, precise, slightly too small. Names and addresses. He scanned it and felt the specific sensation of seeing your own address in the middle of a document, the slight unreality of it, like seeing your name in a newspaper. There were 73 names on the list. "These are all the households in the active eviction process," Victoria said. "Some of them have already relocated. Some are still in their units. Some are in the same position you're in. Deadline coming, nowhere to go, not enough time to fight it through proper channels." Cole looked at the list, at the addresses he recognized: Mercer Street, Carver Avenue, the blocks between them that made up the neighborhood he'd lived in for 4 years. The names he didn't know but could put faces to: the woman on the second floor at 1740, who always had her door open and the smell of something good coming out of it. The old man with the newspaper at the bus stop on the corner every morning, regardless of weather. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I've already started doing it," Victoria said. "Hale was put on administrative leave yesterday morning. I'm giving the board 48 hours to vote on his termination before I do it unilaterally with cause, which I have the authority to do under the company charter, and which I intend to do regardless of how the vote goes." She said this without drama, the way you stated a decision already made. "The construction contracts are suspended. The development application is being withdrawn from the city planning office." That stops the evictions? It stops new ones. The active ones require separate action. The legal filings have to be formally withdrawn, which we're processing. It's not instant, but it's moving. She looked at him. "Your specific notice will be withdrawn by end of business today. Dennis Park should receive the documentation within the hour." Cole absorbed this. He thought about Dennis Park above the laundromat on Prospect Avenue with his 11 simultaneous cases. He thought about 14 days and 11, and the math that had never come out right. "Okay," he said. Victoria closed the folder and put her hands flat on the table. "I need to say something else." "Say it." "When I was here, the morning after the accident, I saw your papers on this table, the bills, the eviction notice." She kept her eyes on him. "I saw the amounts, the medical bills. I know what the prescription cost, and I know what you told Maria at Ridgeline, because Maria was kind enough to tell my assistant what you'd said to her last week when you came to the counter and couldn't pay." She paused. "You told her you'd figure it out." Cole said nothing. "I want to offer you something," Victoria said, "and I need you to hear the whole thing before you react, because I think you have a reflex around this kind of offer that is going to make you say no before you've finished listening." He almost said something right then. She wasn't wrong about the reflex, and she wasn't wrong that he was already feeling it. That structural resistance, the thing that wasn't exactly pride but lived in the same neighborhood. "I'm listening," he said. "There's a position at Sterling," Victoria said. "It's not a favor and it's not charity, and I need you to understand that before I tell you what it is." "It's a real position with a real salary and benefits, and it's open because the man who held it left in October, and I haven't been able to replace him in a way I'm confident about." She held up one hand, preemptive. "I'm telling you this now, not because it's connected to what I did about the eviction. Those are separate. The eviction is being handled regardless. But because I looked at your background after you called this morning, your work history." Cole was still. "You spent 6 years at Kendrick Freight in their regional logistics division," Victoria said. before they were acquired, before the restructuring. She seemed to be recalling specific things. You built their Northeast Corridor scheduling system from the ground up in 2019. According to internal records I shouldn't technically have access to, but do, that system reduced their late delivery rate by 31% in the first year. 33%, Cole said before he could stop himself. Something almost reached Victoria's expression. The position is Director of Logistics Operations for Sturco's distribution subsidiary, not Sturco Properties. That's being restructured. Sturco Distribution. They move freight and equipment, and they've had inefficiency problems for 2 years that I believe are fundamentally organizational rather than mechanical. She kept looking at him. The salary is $120,000. Full benefits including medical, which covers dependents. Lily's medical bills, all 3 statements, totaled $47,000. Cole looked at the table. I told you there was a reflex, Victoria said quietly. You said it wasn't charity, Cole said. How do I know it's not charity? Because I'm going to need you to fix an operation that's costing my company money every quarter, she said. And because if you can't do it, I'm going to have to let you go. And that conversation is going to be deeply uncomfortable for both of us given everything. So I would prefer that you do it. A pause. But I think you can do it. That's not me being generous. That's me having read your work history and done the math. Cole sat with it. He looked at the folder on the table, at the list of 73 names, at his own address in the middle of it. He thought about Lily sleeping at the end of the hall, sleeping properly for the first time in a week, breathing in and out in the good quiet rhythm. He thought about the thing Victoria had said when she left the first time. Thank you for my life, said plainly, like a fact. And he thought about the business card on his counter and the 3 days he'd spent looking at it and not calling. I need to know something first, Cole said. Ask it. Hale. He looked at her. Is he going to face actual consequences? Not a quiet exit with a severance package. Actual consequences. Victoria held his gaze. The documentation we have is going to the district attorney's office by end of week. What they do with it is their decision, but the documentation is solid. I'm not protecting him. A beat. I'm also not going to protect the 2 board members who told me to handle it quietly when I have reason to believe they knew more than they should have when they said it. Do you have reason to believe that? I'm developing it, she said. Carefully. Cole thought about what it cost to say that, what it cost someone in her position to sit at a kitchen table in an apartment on Mercer Street and admit to a man she'd known for 4 days that she was building a case against her own board members. He thought about the folder with its handwritten list, and the phone call this morning where she'd said it'll be handled within the hour, and the fact that she'd come here without the visible security detail, just herself and a folder and the willingness to say the things that needed saying. The car that dropped you off, Cole said. It went around the corner. Yes. Security? 2 people. They're down the block. You said you came without... I said no visible security, Victoria said, which is slightly different. Something passed through her expression, a trace of dry humor that she seemed to decide after a moment not to suppress entirely. I'm a quick study, but I'm not reckless. Cole looked at her. And then, because there was only so long a man could resist the specific absurdity of the situation, he laughed. Not a big laugh, nothing theatrical, just a short, controlled sound that was partly tiredness and partly the recognition of something genuinely, darkly funny about all of it. This woman who ran a billion-dollar corporation, sitting at his unsteady kitchen table with a folder of handwritten names, telling him she'd parked her security detail around the corner. Victoria watched him laugh, and then, slowly, she smiled. A real one this time, not the almost smile from the kitchen or the morning with the toast, but an actual smile. And it changed her face in a way that was more significant than he'd expected. You're going to say yes, she said. I didn't say that. You laughed, she said. In my experience, when someone laughs in the middle of a conversation like this, they've already decided. Your experience might be wrong. It might be, she said, but it usually isn't. He stood up from the table and went to the counter and stood there a moment with his back to her, looking at the small kitchen, at the coffee maker with the crack in the carafe he'd repaired with superglue, at the space where the prescription bottle had been before he'd moved it to the shelf. The business card was still on the counter. He'd called the number on it this morning. The card was slightly less pristine than it had been, had a small crease from being in his jacket pocket, a partial fingerprint on one corner. He turned around. "If I take the job," he said, "and I'm bad at it." "Then we have a problem," Victoria said. "Yes." "And the eviction withdrawal isn't connected." "The eviction withdrawal is already filed," she said. "Look at your phone." He picked up his phone. There was an email from Dennis Park, sent 14 minutes ago. Subject line: "Withdrawal notice received. Mercer Street." He opened it. 2 sentences: the withdrawal had been filed. The eviction process was terminated. Cole stared at the screen for a moment. 14 days, 11 days. The number that had been the ceiling of his world for 2 weeks, and now it was just a number. "Okay," he said. Victoria waited. "The job," Cole said. "I'll take it." He put the phone face down on the counter, the same way he'd put it down the night of the storm when the bank notification came in and took $20 from him. Different feeling this time. "But I need 2 weeks before I start. Lily needs to get stable, and I need to—" He stopped. "Whatever you need," Victoria said. "You don't get to say whatever you need," Cole said. "You're running a company, not making wishes. 2 weeks is what I need. If that doesn't work, 2 weeks works," she said. He came back to the table and sat down. She was still there, still with the folder, still with the healing line on her forehead, still with that quality of being more present in a space than most people were. "There's something I want to say to you," Cole said, "and you don't have to respond to it." "All right." He thought about how to say it. He wasn't a man who made speeches. He wasn't a man who got into his feelings in the presence of people he didn't know well, and he didn't know Victoria Sterling well. Not really, even though she'd slept on his couch and eaten his eggs and watched his daughter talk about Gerald the elephant. "What happened to my family," he said, "and to the other 72 families on that list? That's not a number. It's not a line in a business case. I understand that you didn't know what Hale was doing. I believe you." He held her gaze. "But I also need you to know that the reason I had $31 when you came through my window was because your company bought the building I live in and decided to empty it. Hale used your name to do that, your company's name. And 72 other families don't have Dennis Park, and they don't have your business card on their counter." Victoria didn't look away. "I know," she said. "The same specific quality as thank you for my life. Just the fact of it," said plainly. "The families who already relocated," Cole said. "The ones who are gone. What happens to them?" A pause. It was a real pause, not a strategic one. "I don't have a complete answer for that yet," she said. "I have people trying to locate them. Some of them may not want to come back. Some of them—" She stopped. "I'm going to figure it out. It's going to take longer than the eviction withdrawals, and the outcome isn't going to be perfect, and I want you to know that I know that." Cole looked at her. It was not the answer he would have preferred. It wasn't even close to the answer he would have preferred, but it was the honest answer, and he'd found, over the past 4 days, that Victoria Sterling's particular form of honesty was one of the more reliable things about her. "Okay," he said. From the end of the hall came a sound. Not the coughing, not the labored breathing, but the simple sound of Lily shifting in bed, the small creak of the mattress, the particular sound of a child sleeping and being fine. Both of them heard it. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "She sounds better," Victoria said. "Yeah," Cole said. "She does." He got up and went down the hall, because that was the reflex, 4 years of reflex. Any sound from Lily's room and his feet moved before he decided to move them. He got to the doorway and looked in. She was on her side, one arm around Gerald the elephant, hair spread across the pillow in the ink-dark way. Her breathing was slow and even and completely clear. He stood in the doorway for a moment longer than he needed to. Then he went back to the kitchen. Victoria was still at the table, but she'd closed the folder. She was looking at the counter, at the coffee maker, at the superglue repair on the carafe, at the small, ordinary details of a kitchen that had been managed very carefully for a long time with not enough of anything. She looked up when he came in. "She's fine," Cole said. "Good," Victoria said. And then after a moment, "I owe you something that I don't know how to pay back." "I know," Cole said. He sat back down. We can start with the job and see what happens. She nodded slowly. The light in the kitchen had shifted while they'd been talking. The winter afternoon going gold and thin the way it did at 3 o'clock in December. The particular light that made everything look slightly more permanent than it actually was. I need to tell you something before I go, Victoria said. About the night of the accident. He waited. I drove myself because I'd just left a dinner where Richard Hale had been present, she said. He'd been strange all evening, quiet, in a way he wasn't usually quiet. I'd been thinking, on the drive, that I needed to look more carefully at his project. She looked at her hands. The accident. The investigators looked at the car yesterday. The brake system had been partially compromised, a partial failure that would have been survivable in normal conditions. She looked up. In a blizzard, on a road like Mercer Street, it wasn't. Cole was still. They're investigating it as intentional, Victoria said. As an attempt. The kitchen was very quiet. Hale, Cole said. That's what we're looking at, she said. We don't have confirmation, but the timing and what he knew I was starting to look at, she stopped. I'm telling you this because you should understand what you drove into that night. You didn't just pull an injured woman from a car accident. Cole looked at the counter, at the card, still there, still with the fingerprint in one corner. Would it have changed anything? He asked. If you'd known it was me, someone connected to the evictions, would you have told me differently? Would any of this be different? Victoria thought about it. He appreciated that she thought about it rather than answering immediately. I don't know, she said. I'd like to think not, but I don't know. She held his gaze. Would it have changed anything for you? If you'd known, when you went out in the storm, who I was? Cole thought about the window, the headlights at the wrong angle, the calculation that took about 3 seconds and ended with him putting on his coat. No, he said, but I'm annoyed that I can't say it would have. Victoria almost smiled again, and this time it made it most of the way. 2 weeks, she said, getting up. 2 weeks, Cole said. She picked up the folder and her coat and she went to the door. He opened it. She stepped into the hallway and then, the same as the first time, just one turn back. She looked at him. You should know, she said, that when I called you Cole this morning on the phone, before you'd told me who you were, I knew it was you. He hadn't thought about that. He thought about it now. How? There's not a lot of people who'd call my direct line and just say the name of a street, she said, like that was identification enough. She turned and walked down the hall. Cole stood in the doorway and watched her go, and this time when she turned the corner, he didn't close the door immediately. He stood there in the apartment doorway in the thin gold December light, one hand on the frame, listening to the building, the pipes, the distant television from downstairs, the small sounds of a place where people lived and managed and continued. Then from behind him, from down the hall, Lily's voice. Dad? He closed the door. In here, Bug, he called back, already moving. Go back to sleep. Is the lady gone? Yeah, she's gone. A pause. Is everything okay? Cole stopped in the hallway outside her door. He thought about the eviction withdrawal in Dennis Park's inbox. He thought about 2 weeks and a salary and medical coverage that included dependents. He thought about 72 other names on a handwritten list and the families he didn't have answers for yet and the work that hadn't been done and might not be done perfectly. He thought about Richard Hale and brake systems and the specific cold of 9 degrees at midnight and the weight of someone who trusted you without knowing they were trusting you and the headlights at the wrong angle that he'd almost missed. Yeah, he said, things are okay. Lily was quiet for a moment. Okay, Dad, she said, with the sleepy conviction of someone who believed him and the sound of Gerald the elephant being adjusted. And then silence. Cole stood in the hallway a moment longer. Then he went to the kitchen and turned on the light against the fading afternoon and started making dinner. The dinner he made that night was pasta with canned tomatoes and whatever herbs were still viable in the small jars above the stove, which was not a remarkable meal by any measure, but was hot and there was enough of it. And Lily ate sitting up in bed with Gerald the elephant propped against the pillow beside her like a guest. She was better. Not fully better. Her appetite was still reduced and she tired easily and the cough lingered in the mornings. But the specific quality of the fever had broken. that grinding, persistent heat that had been in her face for nearly 2 weeks, and in its absence she looked more like herself. She asked 3 questions during dinner that had nothing to do with being sick, which Cole took as a reliable diagnostic indicator. After she was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with the pasta pot soaking in the sink and his phone in front of him and read Dennis Park's email 3 times. Not because he didn't understand it the first time, because sometimes you needed to read something 3 times before it stopped feeling like it might disappear. He texted Dennis. Saw the notice. Thank you for everything you did on this. Dennis texted back 9 minutes later. Don't thank me, I didn't do it. Whatever you did, it worked. Get some sleep. Cole put the phone down and looked at the kitchen. The superglue carafe, the herbs above the stove, the counter where the business card had been until 20 minutes ago when he'd moved it to the drawer because he didn't need it on the counter anymore. He'd saved her number to his phone. The card was just a card now. He should have felt relief. He did feel relief. It was there, somewhere in his system, a loosening of something that had been pulled tight for so long he'd stopped noticing it as tension and had started experiencing it as just the baseline of existence. But there was something else underneath it, or alongside it, something he didn't have a clean name for. Not satisfaction, exactly. Not quite. He washed the pot. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed. He slept, which surprised him. And he slept for almost 6 hours straight, which hadn't happened in longer than he could accurately remember. The 2 weeks went fast and slow in the specific way of time when you're waiting for something that is both anticipated and dreaded. Lily got better in increments. A little more each day, a little less coughing, a little more of the personality that had been subdued by 6 weeks of illness. By the end of the first week, she was reading in bed again, which meant she was well enough to require books. And Cole made 2 trips to the library on Clark Street because the library was free and Lily burned through books the way other kids burned through television. He spent the first week doing the practical things. He called the medical billing offices and explained, with the specific patience of a man who had made this type of call many times, that circumstances had changed and he would be addressing the outstanding balances in the coming weeks. The voices on the other end shifted perceptibly when he said this, not dramatically, but in the small ways that voices shifted when they stopped expecting a negotiation and started expecting a payment. He didn't love what that shift implied about how those conversations usually went for other people. He called his landlord, Gerald Briggs, who answered the phone with a wariness that suggested he was expecting a different kind of call and had been dreading it. Cole told him the eviction had been withdrawn. Briggs was quiet for a moment. I got the paperwork, Briggs said. I know. Another pause. Look, Cole, the bank situation? I'm not calling about that, Cole said. I just wanted you to know I'm aware the pressure's off, and I'm not going to make your life harder than it already is. He paused. I'm starting a new job next week. I'll be current on rent within 60 days. Briggs was quiet again in a different way. 60 days, he said finally. 60 days, Cole confirmed. He heard Briggs exhale. It was the sound of a man setting something down that had been heavy. All right, Briggs said. 60 days. The second week was harder, for reasons Cole hadn't entirely anticipated. He'd had time to sit with everything, the full shape of it, the thing with Hale, the brake system, the 72 other names on Victoria's handwritten list, and the more time he had with it, the more he found himself thinking about the question underneath everything, the one he hadn't asked Victoria directly, because the moment hadn't been right and he wasn't sure the answer would help him. How does a thing like this happen and nobody catches it? Not the fraud specifically. He understood how fraud happened, understood that people did it when the incentives were high enough and the oversight was thin enough, and the checks weren't actually checking. That part was simple, almost boring in its simplicity. What he kept coming back to was the human machinery around it, the 72 eviction notices that went out with Sterling Corporation's name on them. The project review meetings where someone had to have asked questions, or should have. The approvals and sign-offs and process checkpoints that existed precisely to catch things like this and hadn't. He wasn't sure he had the right to that question. He was going to work for the company. He was going to take the salary and fix the distribution operation and pay off the medical bills and get Lily's prescription filled every month without doing math in a parking lot. That was the deal. But he kept coming back to it. On the Thursday before he was due to start, Lily asked him over breakfast, Real breakfast, eggs and actual orange juice because they could, if he was nervous. Little bit, he said. About what part? He thought about it. Being new somewhere, he said. I've done it before. I don't love it. You're good at things, though, Lily said, with the complete lack of qualifiers that children applied to statements of fact, hoping they agree with you. She tore off a piece of toast and gave half to Gerald the elephant, who could not eat toast but accepted it in the spirit it was offered. Victoria thinks so, she said. She said you were good at things. She said I built a system that reduced late deliveries by 33%. Lily looked at him. Same thing, she said, and went back to her eggs. He arrived at Sterling Corporation's headquarters on Monday morning at 8:45, which was 15 minutes early, because he had never in his adult life arrived anywhere at the actual scheduled time and wasn't going to start now. The building was on the east side of downtown Cleveland, 42 floors of glass and steel that managed to communicate expense without actually being beautiful, which Cole thought was an interesting architectural achievement in the wrong direction. The lobby was marble and tall and had the specific silence of a place where the acoustics had been engineered rather than occurring naturally. He gave his name at the security desk. The woman behind it, who had a small silver earring shaped like a leaf and an expression of professional neutrality, typed something, looked at her screen, and looked back at him with a slight recalibration. Mr. Harrison, Ms. Sterling's assistant will be down to meet you. She handed him a badge. Welcome to Sterling. He stood in the lobby and held the badge and waited. The assistant who came down was not Carla, the woman who'd answered the phone, but a younger man named Tom, who had the slightly frantic efficiency of someone who was very good at his job and very aware that his job required him to be very good at it. He shook Cole's hand, told him the building layout in approximately 90 seconds while moving through it, and delivered him to a conference room on the 31st floor where 3 people were already seated and waiting. He was not taken to Victoria's office first. He noted this without reading too much into it. The 3 people in the conference room were his immediate team, a woman named Janet Chu, who ran the day-to-day scheduling operations for Sturco Distribution, and who looked at Cole with the careful neutrality of someone who had been in this meeting before with a different new director and was reserving judgment this time. A man named Brian Okafor, who handled the carrier relationships and who, Cole would discover over the next several weeks, actually knew more about the operation's problems than anyone else, but had been talking to people who weren't listening. And a woman named Sasha Reyes, who was 26 and had been there for 18 months and had, by Janet's later admission, been the only person consistently flagging the inefficiency problems in writing for the past year and getting responses that amounted to politely worded instructions to continue doing what wasn't working. Cole sat down. He looked at the 3 of them. They looked back at him. I want to say something before we start, Cole said. I came from outside this company. I don't know your processes and I don't know your history, and for the first couple weeks I'm going to ask a lot of questions that might seem basic. That's not a test. I actually don't know the answers. He looked at each of them in turn. What I do know is that you've been running an operation with a structural problem for 2 years, and I think you know where the problem is, and I want to hear what you think before I form any opinions of my own. Janet Chu looked at him with a slightly different expression than she'd started with. Brian Okafor leaned forward. Sasha Reyes opened a folder she'd brought without anyone asking her to bring anything. They talked for 3 hours. For 3, Cole came away from that first morning with 11 pages of notes on the back of the agenda sheet Tom had given him, a working theory about the core inefficiency that he thought he could prove in about a week, and the particular tiredness of having concentrated very hard for a sustained period. He also came away with the beginning of a sense that these 3 people were competent and overloaded and had been let down by the people above them for long enough that they'd stopped expecting to be listened to. He was going to listen to them. He didn't see Victoria that first day, or the second. On the 3rd day, she appeared in the doorway of the office that had been assigned to him, a corner office on 31, which was more space than he'd ever had, and which he'd already managed to make look occupied by distributing his papers and notes in the specific organized disorder that was his natural working state. She looked at the office. You've made yourself at home. I function better when the space looks used, Cole said. Blank surfaces are distracting. She came in and sat down in the chair across from his desk, which was a visitor's chair and was not as good as the chairs in the conference rooms, but was what was available. She looked at the papers, not reading them, just noting the existence of them, the density. How's the first week? Productive, Cole said. Your distribution subsidiary has a routing problem. Not the software, the logic behind how the software's been told to prioritize. Someone set the parameters about 3 years ago based on conditions that don't exist anymore, and nobody's revisited them. Can you fix it? Yes, Cole said, without hesitation, because he could. It's going to require about 2 weeks of reconfiguration and then a parallel run period to verify, but the inefficiency should be recoverable. I'd estimate between 20 and 25% reduction in missed delivery windows in the first quarter after implementation. Victoria looked at him. That's a conservative estimate, Cole said. I believe you, she said. I wasn't doubting it. She paused. I was thinking that you sound different here than you did on Mercer Street. Different how? She considered the question. Certain, she said. You were certain about some things on Mercer Street. But this is a different kind of certain. This is your territory. Cole thought about that. Logistics is what I know, he said. The other things, he stopped. The other things are harder, she said. Yeah. She was quiet for a moment, and he was aware that she was also in a different version of herself than the one he'd first encountered. Or maybe not different, exactly, but fuller. More fully assembled. This was Victoria Sterling in her environment, in the place where she'd built something and knew every floor of it, and there was a quality to her presence here that was different from the quality in his apartment kitchen, something with more structure to it. He found, somewhat to his own surprise, that he liked both versions. The one on his couch with the folded blanket, the one in the doorway of his office on the 31st floor. I need to tell you something, she said. About Hale. Cole's attention sharpened. The district attorney's office received the documentation Friday, she said. They moved faster than I expected. He was arrested Saturday morning. Cole didn't say anything for a moment. The brake system? That's part of it. The financial fraud is the cleaner case. The documentation is very solid, and the DA has prosecuted similar structures before. The attempted... She paused. The word seemed to cost her something. The attempted murder charge is more complex. They're building it. I've been told to expect it to be filed within 60 days. How are you doing with that? Cole asked. She looked at him. Something crossed her face, surprise maybe at the direction of the question. People in her world, he guessed, didn't ask her that. They asked how the company was doing with it, how the board was responding, how the PR was managing it. I'm doing, she said. Some days better than others. She straightened slightly in the visitor's chair. I've been thinking about the fact that someone who sat in my conference room every week for 6 years tried to have me killed. That's a strange thing to carry. I imagine it is, Cole said. The board voted to remove the 2 members I'd flagged, she said, 3 days ago. I didn't have to do it unilaterally. The rest of the board moved on it once the documentation was complete. She paused. I think they moved on it partly because of the legal exposure and partly because enough of them, when it came down to it, didn't want to be that kind of company. Good, Cole said. That's all you're going to say about it? What else should I say? She looked at him with something that wasn't quite amusement, but was in the same family. Nothing, I suppose. She stood up. The families on the list, she said, the ones who already relocated. I've been in contact with 11 of them so far. 2 want to return to Lakeside. The units they were in have been held. The others... She shook her head. Some of them don't want to come back. They've moved, rebuilt something somewhere else. I can't make them whole. I can offer compensation for the costs they incurred, which I'm doing, but I can't give them back what they lost. Cole was quiet. I know that's not enough, she said. I know you know, he said. She looked at him a moment, then she went to the door. The apartment building on Mercer, she said. Sturco Properties owns it. You know that. I know. I'm transferring ownership to a resident cooperative, she said. The residents elect the board. They set the terms. They own it. We've been working with a community development attorney to structure it properly. She paused. Briggs will be compensated at fair market value. He's been struggling too. The mortgage situation, the pressure that put on the building's tenants. A beat. It's not a simple fix. Nothing about this is simple, but it's the right structure. Cole looked at her. You're not going to argue with me about it, she said. Why would I argue with you? I don't know, she said. You argue with me about things sometimes. I argue with you when you're wrong, Cole said. This isn't wrong. Something settled in her expression. No, she said. I don't think it is either. She left. Tom appeared in the hallway, trailing her with a tablet and a question, and Cole watched through his glass office wall as they moved down the corridor toward the elevator, Victoria walking at the pace of someone who was always slightly ahead of the space she was moving through. He turned back to his desk. Sasha Reyes knocked on his open door at 10 minutes to 5. She had the folder she always had and an expression that meant she'd been thinking about something for most of the afternoon. Can I say something? She asked. Sit down, Cole said. She sat. I've been here for 18 months, she said, and I've written 11 memos about the routing parameter problem. 11. I have the drafts. She looked at the folder. Nobody acted on any of them. I read 2 of them this morning, Cole said, the ones from February and the one from September. They were correct. Your diagnosis of the problem was correct in February. Sasha was quiet for a moment. I know, she said, and it came out with the slight rough edge of someone who had been told they were wrong about something they knew they were right about for long enough that saying, I know, required some recovery. I'm going to need your documentation going back to the beginning, Cole said. Every memo, every flag, and I need your recommendation on the parameter reset, not a summary, the full recommendation you would have made if someone had been listening. She looked at him. Can you have that by Wednesday? Cole asked. I can have it tomorrow, she said. Wednesday is fine, Cole said. Take the time to make it complete, not just fast. She nodded and stood up and then stopped at the door. Why didn't anyone listen before? She said. Not accusingly, just asking, the way people asked questions they'd been sitting with for a long time. Cole thought about it honestly. Because the person who should have been paying attention was too busy protecting something that was making him money, he said. That's not a reflection on your memos. The memos were right. She held that for a moment. Okay, she said. Wednesday. She left. Cole sat at his desk in the thinning afternoon and looked at his 11 pages of notes and thought about the routing parameters and the carrier relationships and the specific organizational problem that had been labeled a software problem for 2 years when it was really a logic problem, a human decision problem, a problem of who had been making choices and why. Somewhere on the 39th floor, or wherever Victoria Sterling's office was, he hadn't been up there yet, the same question was probably being asked about different systems, larger ones, and probably would be asked for a long time. That was, he supposed, the shape of the work. 3 weeks after he started, Lily came to the office. Not officially. Cole had a Saturday he needed to spend catching up on documentation, and Lily's weekend arrangement with her school friend 2 buildings over had fallen through, and it was either bring her in or reschedule, so he brought her in. He called Tom, who was the kind of person who worked on Saturdays without being asked, and Tom had said it was fine and meant it. The building on a Saturday was a different thing from the building on a weekday. Quieter, emptier, a few people scattered on various floors doing whatever required Saturday attention. Lily was, characteristically, undaunted by the scale of it. She sat at the small conference table in Cole's office with her library book and Gerald the elephant, and occasionally asked him questions that had nothing to do with what he was working on, and he answered them between paragraphs. At 11:30, Victoria appeared. She was not dressed for work. She was in jeans and a dark sweater, and her hair was down instead of up, which Cole had only seen once before and which made her look in this context like a person rather than a CEO, and he wasn't sure which of those was more accurate. She stopped in his doorway with a coffee in each hand. Tom told me you were in, she said. I was already here. She held out one of the coffees. Cole took it. Lily looked up from her book. Victoria! Victoria's expression did the thing it always did around Lily. It softened in a particular way, something that was not performance, not the careful adult face people put on around children they didn't know how to talk to. It was genuine. Hi, Lily, she said. What are you reading? A book about migratory birds, Lily said. Did you know some birds fly 9,000 miles every year, one way? I didn't know that, Victoria said. It seems like a lot, Lily said with the judicious gravity of a 7-year-old. But they do it because they have to. They're built for it. She considered this. I think some people are like that too. Victoria looked at Cole. Cole looked at his coffee. May I? Victoria asked, gesturing to the other chair at the small conference table. Sure, Lily said, as if this required no deliberation. Victoria sat down, and for the next hour and a half she was in Cole's office on a Saturday morning, drinking coffee and talking to Lily about migratory birds and the specific grievances Lily had regarding a substitute teacher who had mispronounced her name 3 times despite being corrected, and occasionally saying something to Cole that was about work, and occasionally something that wasn't, and the 3 of them were in the same space in the particular unremarkable way that felt, from the outside, like the most natural arrangement in the world. At 1 o'clock, Cole made the executive decision to stop working and get lunch. He said this, and Victoria said she knew a place 3 blocks away, and Lily immediately said she wanted to come, and they went. The place was not fancy. A Vietnamese restaurant with plastic laminate tables and a menu that had been the same for 15 years and portions that were generous without apology. Victoria had clearly been there before. The woman at the front, who was small and moved quickly, looked at Victoria and then at Cole and Lily, and back at Victoria with an expression of such transparent curiosity that Cole had to look away to avoid reacting to it. They ordered. They ate. Lily got broth on her shirt, and Cole blotted it with a napkin with the specific practiced efficiency of a parent who had been blotting things off Lily's shirts for 7 years, and Victoria watched this operation and said nothing, but something in her face was quiet and attentive in the way it got when she was registering something she thought was important. Can I ask you something? Cole said, when Lily was occupied with the very serious business of deciding if she wanted to eat her remaining dumpling or save it for later. Yes, Victoria said. The cooperative structure for the building, he said. Whose idea was that specifically? The resident-owned model. Victoria thought about it. Mine, originally, she said. But I want to be honest. I got there by looking at what would actually correct the wrong, rather than what would look like correcting it. There's a difference, and they don't always lead to the same place. She turned her water glass in her hands. The board pushed back. They wanted a community fund, a lump sum payment, a foundation, something they could put a number on and close the ledger. But you didn't go with that. A fund goes away, Victoria said. Ownership stays. The difference between giving someone money once and giving them a stake in something permanent, she stopped. That's not a charitable distinction. That's a structural one. If I was actually trying to fix it and not just address it, the structure had to be permanent. Cole looked at her. What? She said. Nothing, he said. He stopped, because he wasn't sure how to say what he was thinking without it sounding like more than he intended it to sound like. I was wrong about something, earlier, when I thought about you. When you thought I was going to make a gesture and call it justice, Victoria said. He didn't confirm or deny it. You weren't entirely wrong, she said. That's what the board wanted. And there have been situations in my career where I did the version that looked like the fix instead of the fix itself. She said this the way she said hard things, directly, without apology, but without performance either. I don't want to tell you I've changed because one difficult month doesn't change a person, but I'm trying to pay attention to the difference now in a way I wasn't before. Lily looked up from her dumpling deliberations. Are you guys talking about serious stuff? A little bit, Cole said. Okay, Lily said. I'm going to eat the dumpling. She ate it. The afternoon moved on the way afternoons did. The light shifting, the restaurant thinning out, the easy movement of time in the company of people you've stopped having to perform for. Cole paid the check and Victoria let him, which he noted and appreciated. They walked back to the building together, and Lily walked between them with Gerald the elephant and a running commentary about a pigeon she'd spotted that had an interesting coloration, and the 3 of them moved through the cold Cleveland afternoon like something that had found its arrangement without anyone planning it. At the building entrance, Victoria stopped. I need to tell you something, she said, and I'm going to tell you here, outside rather than upstairs, because upstairs I'm the CEO, and down here I'm just... She stopped, made a small gesture that might have been frustration with herself. Down here, I'm just me. Cole waited. What you said to me in your apartment, she said. The second time I came. About the 72 families, and about the fact that I was the name on the paper, even if I didn't know what Hale was doing with it. She looked at him. I've been thinking about that every day. Not the guilt of it. I've been trying to separate the guilt from the responsibility, because guilt is what you feel and responsibility is what you do. And one of them is actually useful. She paused. You said you believed I didn't know. I need you to know I'm not resting on that. Not knowing is not the same as not being responsible. I know, Cole said. I know you know, she said. But I needed to say it out loud to you specifically because you're the one who… She stopped again, and this time the stop felt different, less controlled. You're the one who pulled me out of a frozen car and fed me eggs and didn't ask for anything, and I built the machine that was dismantling your life. And those two things are both true, and I don't want to only talk about one of them. Cole was quiet for a moment. Lily was looking between them with the specific attention of a child who understood that adults were doing something important and was waiting, patiently, to find out what it was. I know, Cole said again. Then, you're doing the right things. That counts. Does it? It's the only thing that does, he said. After the fact, when you can't undo the fact, the only thing that counts is what you do next. Victoria held his gaze. That fast internal calculation was running, but it ran different now than it had in his apartment kitchen. Less defended, something more open underneath it. I'm going to keep doing the right things, she said. I want you to know that. Not because I owe you, although I do, but because it's… She paused. It's what the situation asks for, and I'm trying to be someone who responds to what the situation actually asks for rather than what's convenient. I know, Cole said, for the third time. And then, because it was true and he thought she should hear it, I think you are. Something shifted in her face, not dramatically, just shifted. Lily tugged Cole's hand. Dad, can we go up? It's cold. Yeah, Bug. He looked at Victoria. We're going up. Of course. She stepped back toward the building entrance. I'll be in the office for another few hours if you need anything. We're fine, Cole said. She nodded once. Then she looked at Lily. Goodbye, Lily. Bye, Victoria, Lily said. You should get a warmer coat. Victoria looked down at her coat, which was, in Cole's assessment, perfectly warm by normal standards, but maybe not by Cleveland in December standards, and a short laugh came out of her. Real, unguarded, the kind that happened before you decided whether to let it happen. I'll look into it, she said. She went inside. Cole and Lily stood on the sidewalk for a moment, and then Lily looked up at him with the frank, dark eyes that missed very little. She likes you, Lily said. We work together, Cole said. That's not what I said, Lily said, and started walking toward the entrance with the serene confidence of someone who has made a point and considers it self-sufficient. Cole followed his daughter into the building, and the door closed behind them, and the December wind moved down the empty sidewalk, cold and clean, the way it did after storms when the air had been scrubbed down to something close to honest. Lily said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world, and then she walked through the building's front door without looking back. And Cole stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the cold and thought about what it meant that a 7-year-old had clearer vision than most adults he knew. He went inside. January settled over Cleveland the way it always did, without apology, without moderation, with the specific determination of a season that had no interest in being liked. The temperature dropped below zero twice in the first 2 weeks, and the lake wind came off the water with a violence that made December's blizzard seem, in retrospect, almost polite. Cole drove to work instead of walking, which added 12 minutes to his commute and meant scraping the windshield every morning, and he did it without complaint because complaint was not a productive use of energy and he had plenty of other uses for it. The routing parameter reset took 19 days from implementation to verification. Sasha Reyes had her full documentation on his desk by Wednesday of the first week as promised, and it was thorough in the way that only the work of someone who'd been ignored for long enough could be thorough. Every assumption documented, every data point sourced, every alternative hypothesis addressed preemptively because she'd learned to build arguments that couldn't be dismissed. Cole read it twice, added 7 pages of his own analysis, and had a proposal on Janet Chu's desk by Friday. Janet read it over the weekend. On Monday, she came to his office before 9 and sat down in the visitor's chair and said, "I owe Sasha an apology." "I'm not the right person to tell," Cole said. "I know," Janet said. "I'm telling you because I needed to say it out loud first." She paused. "She flagged this in February of last year. I read the memo. I sent it to Hale's office, and he said to table it, and I didn't push back." She looked at her hands. "I should have pushed back." "Yes," Cole said. "Not unkindly, just honestly." Janet nodded. "I'm going to tell her directly," she said. "Not as a HR gesture. Actually tell her." "That'd be good," Cole said. She got up to leave and then stopped at the door. "You're different from the last director," she said. "I hope so," Cole said. "I don't know him." "He smiled a lot," Janet said, with a specificity that communicated everything necessary about what the smiling had covered. Cole did not smile a lot, as a rule. He smiled when something was funny, and occasionally when Lily said something that caught him off guard, and he'd found himself in the past few weeks smiling in 1 or 2 moments in Victoria's vicinity that he'd chosen not to examine too carefully. But he did not deploy smiling as a professional instrument, and he was starting to understand that this was either going to be a significant asset in this environment or a problem, and he was betting on the former. Brian Okafor turned out to be the most valuable person on the team, which Cole had suspected from the first meeting, but which became structurally clear over the course of January. Brian knew every carrier they worked with by name, knew the personal relationships, knew who had been overpromising and why, knew the history of every contract dispute going back 3 years. He'd been carrying this knowledge in his head because the previous director hadn't wanted it in writing. Hale's preference, apparently, had been for deniability on the carrier side, which was another thread in the same fabric of how the whole operation had been run for the benefit of one man's pocket rather than the company's actual function. Cole had Brian start a carrier relationship database the second week. Not a formal system, a living document, updated as things changed, organized in whatever way made sense to Brian, because Brian was going to be the one who used it. Brian had looked at him when he said this with the expression of a man who had been told to do things a particular way for so long that being given latitude felt briefly like a trick. "Whatever way makes sense to me," Brian repeated. "You know these people," Cole said. "I don't. Build it the way your brain works." Brian built it in 4 days. It was not beautiful. It was color-coded with a system that made perfect sense to Brian, and took Cole about 40 minutes to decode, after which it made perfect sense to Cole, too. It was exactly what the operation needed. The first delivery efficiency report came out in the 3rd week of January. 22% improvement in on-time delivery. Not the 20 to 25 Cole had estimated. Slightly better than the low end, not quite at the high end, which was exactly where a genuine improvement landed versus a projected one. Janet had emailed it to him with 2 words in the subject line. Not bad. Cole had replied with 2 words, room left, because there was. 22% was good. It wasn't done. He was at his desk at 6:45 on a Wednesday morning in the last week of January. The building mostly empty, the cleaning crew finishing the floor below, when Victoria appeared in his doorway. This was not unusual by this point. She had a habit, he'd discovered, of being in the building early, before the day assembled itself into meetings and decisions, and the particular performance of leadership that the regular hours required. He had a similar habit for different reasons. The building was quieter before 8, and he thought better in quiet. She had 2 coffees. "You don't have to keep bringing me coffee," Cole said. "I know," she said, and put one on his desk anyway, and sat in the visitor's chair. She had a tablet this time, not a folder, and she set it on her knee but didn't look at it immediately. "The January numbers came in this morning. I saw Janet's email. Not just distribution," Victoria said. "Company-wide, first month since the board restructure." She paused. "They're not good." Cole looked at her. "Not catastrophic," she said quickly, "but the Lakeside situation has been in the news more than I'd hoped. Some clients have been cautious. 2 contracts didn't renew in December. The acquisition we'd been discussing since October fell through because the other company's board was worried about our governance exposure. She looked at her tablet, finally. It's a difficult quarter. What do you need from me? Cole said. She looked up. I don't need anything from you specifically. I wanted you to know the full picture. She paused. You're part of this company now. You should know when it's struggling, not just when things are going well. He appreciated that. He thought about Gerald Briggs in the brown corduroy jacket going pale on the phone. The way information got withheld from people until withholding it was no longer tenable, and what that cost in the gap. He had no interest in operating that way. What's the strategy? He asked. Transparency, Victoria said. I know that sounds simple. It's not simple, it's actually the harder version of every available option. But the clients who are being cautious because they don't know what we're doing about what happened. So I'm going to tell them exactly what we're doing. She set the tablet on her knee. I'm meeting with the 12 largest clients personally over the next 3 weeks. Full briefings. What happened, what's changed, what the new governance structure looks like, what our performance numbers are. She paused. Some of them will leave anyway, but the ones who stay will stay because they actually understand the company they're doing business with, not because we managed their perception of it. Cole was quiet for a moment. You know what your board's advice is going to be about that approach? They've already given it, Victoria said, extensively, a dry edge in her voice. They would prefer a carefully worded letter from our communications team emphasizing stability and forward momentum. What did you tell them? That I'd consider it, she said. I've considered it. I'm going to do the meetings. Cole nodded. She looked at him with the measuring quality he knew by now, the fast internal calculation, except now he understood it wasn't coldness. It was just how she processed things, the same way some people needed to speak things aloud to know what they thought, and she needed to assess them visually before she trusted them. There's something else, she said. He waited. The Mercer Street building, she said. The cooperative transition? It's complete. The residents took ownership on January 15th. Gerald Briggs received fair market value and signed everything over cleanly. She paused. I thought you should hear it directly from me. I know, Cole said. Mrs. Okonkwo from the second floor texted me. Victoria blinked. The woman with the good cooking smells. You noticed that too? I was there for 2 days, Victoria said. The smell was notable. Something close to a smile. She texted you. She has my number, Cole said. She wanted me to know the board met for the first time. She's on it. Victoria's almost smile completed itself. Good, she said. Then quietly, Is it enough? What we did for the building. Cole thought about the honest answer. For the people who are still there, yeah, he said. For the ones who aren't, he shook his head. You already know that answer. You said it yourself in my office. Some things you can't undo. I know, she said. But the structure is right, Cole said. What you built there, it'll hold. The people who are in it, they own it now. That matters more than it might seem like it matters. She held that for a moment. Sometimes you say things that are... She stopped. What? Very plain, she said. Very direct. No ornamentation. She looked slightly annoyed at herself for not finding the right word faster, which was a thing he'd noticed about her. She held herself to a high standard on precision and got privately irritated when she fell short of it. Most people in my world communicate in layers. Everything is wrapped in something else. You don't do that. I don't see the point of it, Cole said. No, she said. I know you don't. She stood up. The routing numbers. I'm using them in the client meetings. With attribution. I'm going to tell them that a new director came in and identified a structural problem that had been generating inefficiency for 2 years and fixed it in 3 weeks. Cole looked at her. You don't have to attribute it. I want to, she said. Transparency, remember? She picked up her tablet. Also, it's accurate. She started for the door and Cole said, without fully deciding to say it, Victoria. She stopped, turned. The 2 contracts that didn't renew in December, he said. Do you have the account names? She looked at him. Why? I know the logistics managers at 4 or 5 of the major freight accounts in this region from my Kendrick days, he said. Some of those relationships might be worth a conversation. She studied him for a moment. Are you offering to make calls on the company's behalf? I'm offering to have conversations with people I know, Cole said. What they do with those conversations is up to them. She looked at him with the full weight of that measuring quality, and then something settled in it. Not the calculation resolving exactly, but the calculation arriving at a place it seemed comfortable with. I'll have Tom send you the names, she said. She left. Cole picked up his coffee and turned to his window, which looked out over the east side of downtown Cleveland in the pale January morning, the lake somewhere beyond the buildings, the cold blue sky of a clear winter day. He drank his coffee and thought about the calls he was going to make, and the database Brian was building, and the memos Sasha had written that no one had read until now, and the specific pleasure of work that was in your territory, work that your hands knew how to do. The month moved on. He called 3 of the contacts he'd mentioned to Victoria. The first call went nowhere. The logistics manager had moved to a different company, and his replacement didn't know Cole. The second call was with a woman named Patricia Hewen, who had known Cole from the early Kendrick days, and who spent 25 minutes asking him about Sturco Distribution's new structure before saying, with characteristic directness, that she'd be interested in a meeting. The third call was with a man named Dwayne Garfield, who spent the first 10 minutes being careful and the next 15 being honest. And the honesty was that his company's board was nervous about the Sterling name, but his own assessment was that the operational changes were credible, and he'd rather do business with a company that had made mistakes and fixed them than one that had never been tested. Cole reported this to Victoria without editorializing. She was quiet for a moment, then, Dwayne Garfield said that? More or less. I've been trying to get a meeting with Garfield's company for 2 years, she said. He wants to come to the building, Cole said. See the operation. Arrange it, she said immediately. He arranged it. Garfield came on a Thursday in the second week of February with 2 of his people, and Cole walked them through the distribution operation himself. Not because Victoria wasn't available, but because Garfield had said explicitly that he wanted to meet the man who'd fixed the routing problem, which was the kind of thing that happened when you started being transparent about who was actually doing what in a company. Victoria joined them for the last 40 minutes, and Cole watched her handle the meeting with the specific skill of someone who was very good at what she did, direct, precise, no layers, none of the corporate wrapper, and thought, not for the first time, that whatever the difficult quarter was going to look like, the company was in better hands than it had been. The contract came through the following week. Not the largest they'd ever signed, Garfield's wasn't that kind of company, but solid, the kind that held. Janet sent Cole an email with 3 exclamation points. He read it, thought about it, and replied with one. He figured that was the appropriate ratio. February was harder than January in one specific way that had nothing to do with work. Lily's medical situation required a follow-up visit to the specialist she'd been seeing, and the specialist, a woman named Dr. Amara Osei, who was precise and direct in a way Cole deeply appreciated, wanted to do additional testing. Not urgent testing, not alarming testing, but the kind that required scheduling and waiting and sitting in beige waiting rooms with outdated magazines while Lily sat beside him asking questions about the machines and the procedures with the scientific detachment she brought to things she was trying not to be afraid of. The insurance covered everything. Cole sat in the waiting room while the tests were happening and looked at the wall and thought about the version of this that had existed 3 months ago. The version where he had $31 and an empty prescription bottle and was doing math in parking lots. He didn't think about it with gratitude exactly, because gratitude implied that something good had been given to him, and what had actually happened was more complicated than that. Things had gone wrong in ways that were not his fault, and then a set of circumstances had intervened, and then he had done his part of the work, and now he was sitting in a beige waiting room with insurance coverage for his daughter's tests, and the medical bills were paid, and the rent was current, and the eviction notice was a piece of paper in a recycling bin somewhere. It didn't feel like a gift. It felt like how it was supposed to have been all along. That was different. The distance between those 2 things, between feeling fortunate and feeling that something simply correct had occurred, was a distance that mattered, And he thought about it sitting in that waiting room with the outdated magazines. And he thought that maybe one of the things wrong with the world was how often people confuse those two feelings. How often the restoration of basic stability was dressed up as generosity when it should have been the floor. Dr. Osei came out and told him the tests were clear. Lily's condition was stable, manageable, the medication was working as intended. She'd need monitoring and she'd need the prescription long term, but there was no escalation, no new concern, nothing that needed immediate action. Cole thanked her. He sat back down in the chair and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes for about 30 seconds, which was the closest he'd come in a long time to letting something he'd been carrying put itself down. Lily came out from the back wearing a small sticker of a cartoon star on her jacket that one of the nurses had apparently given her, and she sat next to Cole and looked at his face with the dark, serious eyes. "Everything okay?" she asked. She'd started asking him that, he'd noticed. Somewhere in the past 2 months, she'd picked up the habit of checking on him the way he checked on her, and he didn't know exactly when it had started, but he suspected it had been going on longer than he'd realized. "Everything's okay," he said. She studied him. "Really? Really?" he said. "You're fine. The tests are clear." She looked at the sticker on her jacket. "I know," she said. "I wasn't worried about that." Cole looked at her. "What were you worried about?" "You," she said simply. "You worry about stuff, and then you look like you're not worried, so I don't worry, but I can tell." She adjusted the sticker. "Gerald says the same thing." "Gerald is a stuffed elephant." "Gerald is a good listener," Lily said with dignity, "and he agrees with me." Cole looked at his daughter, 7 years old, fever gone, color right, sticker on her jacket, and thought about the specific quality of the love he had for her, which was not a comfortable feeling, not the soft version of love, but something with weight and edge and a constant low-level terror underneath it that he'd simply learned to operate around. He thought this was probably what parenting actually was, and that anyone who made it sound simpler than that hadn't been paying close enough attention. "I worry because that's my job," he said. "But things are okay. Better than okay." "Because of Victoria?" Lily asked. "Because of a lot of things," Cole said, "including things I did." Lily considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Both, she decided. It was because of both. He couldn't argue with that. March came. The Hale case moved through the legal system with the grinding pace of all legal systems, which was to say slowly and with considerable paperwork. But the DA's office was building solidly, and the financial fraud charges were, according to Dennis Park, who had no official role in the criminal case but was following it professionally and kept Cole intermittently updated, airtight. The attempted murder charge was taking longer, as Victoria had said it would, but it was being built. The investigators had found the mechanic who'd worked on the brakes, a man with his own financial relationship with Hale that was now very much not worth protecting. The case was moving. The 2 board members, a man named Ferris and a woman named Caldwell, had retained lawyers in January. Their lawyers had been communicating with the DA's office since February. Dennis, who knew one of the assistant DAs personally, told Cole this in early March with the satisfied tone of someone who had spent a career watching people who thought they were protected discover they were not. Cole received this information and filed it in the part of his brain reserved for things that were important to track, but that he was not going to spend energy on, because the legal outcomes were not within his control, and energy directed at things outside your control was a resource leak he couldn't afford. What he could afford now, in March, was quite a bit more than he had been able to afford in December. He paid off the first of the 3 medical billing statements on a Tuesday morning, sat at his desk afterwards, and felt nothing dramatic. Just the quiet click of one door closing properly. 2 more to go. He'd get them in the next 3 months. The routing improvement hit 27% in February, then 30% in March. Brian's carrier database was being used by everyone on the team now, including Janet, who had quietly learned its color coding system without making a formal point of having done so. Sasha had been promoted. Cole had written the recommendation himself, 2 paragraphs, specific, no ornamentation, to senior operations analyst, and had stopped apologizing for knowing things and started simply stating them, which was a change Cole found satisfying in the way you found things satisfying when a problem you'd correctly diagnosed improved in exactly the way you expected. The client meetings Victoria had insisted on doing personally produced results that were mixed and honest, which was the only kind of results that came from honest approaches. 3 clients decided the risk was still too high. 7 stayed. 2 new ones came through in February and March on the basis of referrals from existing clients who had been to the transparency meetings and told people what they'd found there, which was a real company trying to correct real mistakes, which was, apparently, unusual enough to be worth telling people about. It was not a triumphant quarter by any conventional metric. It was a quarter where the floor got established, and that was its own thing. On a Friday evening in the 3rd week of March, Cole was the last one on the 31st floor. He was finishing a carrier reconciliation report that needed to go to Janet by Monday, and the building had the specific quality it had on Friday evenings when the week's activity had drained out and the space returned to itself. He liked this time. He'd always liked the end of a work week, the specific satisfaction of a defined period of effort coming to its close, the brief window before the next one began where you could look at what you'd done and assess it honestly. He was nearly done when his phone lit up. Victoria. Not a call. A text. Still in the building? He typed back, 31st floor. 3 minutes later, she appeared in his doorway. She had her coat on, which meant she'd been leaving or had been going to leave. She looked at the report on his screen. Carrier reconciliation? She asked. Due Monday, he said. I'd rather finish it now. She leaned against the doorframe. She looked tired. Not depleted, just the accumulated weight of a week that had required a great deal of her. He recognized the specific quality of that tiredness because he'd seen it in his own mirror often enough. The Patricia Hewen account, she said. She signed this afternoon. Cole turned from his screen. That was fast. She said she made up her mind after the second meeting, but she wanted the contract language cleaned up. Victoria paused. She also said, and I'm quoting, that she appreciated doing business with a company where the person who fixed the operation was also the one who picked up the phone and had an honest conversation about it. Cole looked at her. She meant you, Victoria said. I know who she meant. I'm telling you because you should hear it, Victoria said. You do the work and you don't make noise about it, and I respect it, but you should hear when it lands. Cole held her gaze for a moment. Okay, he said. I hear it. She came into the office then, all the way in, past the threshold, and sat in the visitor's chair, not with the tablet, not with the folder, just herself. She looked at the window, at the city outside that was still carrying winter at its edges, but had started showing the first suggestions of something else, the incremental lightening that happened in March before spring committed to anything. Can I ask you something personal? She said. You can ask, Cole said. When you came out of the building in the storm, she said, when you saw my car, what was actually going through your head? He thought about it, really thought about it, rather than giving the easy answer. I saw headlights at the wrong angle, he said. I thought someone was in trouble, and that was enough. What else would there be? She looked at him. For most people, she said, there's a calculation. Is this my problem? What does it cost me? What if something goes wrong? How does this affect me? She paused. You didn't do that calculation. Maybe I did it faster than you think, Cole said. Maybe, she said. But the answer you got was the same, regardless of how fast you did it. He was quiet. Outside the window, the city's lights came on the way they always did at dusk, one by one, and then all at once, and the dark settled in with the particular quality of a Friday evening. I've been thinking about that night a lot, Victoria said. Not just the accident, the rescue, the whole thing. Coming back to consciousness in a stranger's apartment, not knowing who you were, or why you'd helped me, or what you wanted. She turned from the window. And what I keep coming back to is that you never wanted anything, not for yourself. You helped me because there was a person who needed help, and then you took care of me in your home because that was what the situation required. And when I offered you money, you said no, and the whole time, she stopped. The whole time I was in your apartment, I was aware that you had almost nothing. The eviction notice, the bills, the medication you couldn't afford, you were carrying all of that, and you never once made me feel like I owed you something. You didn't owe me anything, Cole said. At that point. At that point, she said, hearing the qualifier. At that point, he confirmed. The company owes the neighborhood. That's different. It is different, she said. She looked at her hands, then back at him. I want to tell you something, and I want you to tell me if it's inappropriate given that we work together because I'm aware that it might be. Cole waited. I think about you outside of work, she said, directly. No layers. I'm not going to make this into something it isn't, but I'm also not going to pretend it isn't something, because I have a long-standing problem with avoiding things that are inconvenient, and I've been trying to fix that. She held his gaze. I think about the person I met in that apartment on Mercer Street, and I think about the person in this office, and they're the same person, and I think that's unusual, in my experience. Cole was quiet. You don't have to say anything, she said. I just wanted it said out loud, by me. So it wasn't a thing neither of us was acknowledging. He looked at her. He thought about Lily saying she likes you on the sidewalk in December, with the absolute confidence of someone who had no reason to be wrong. He thought about the fold of his blanket in the morning, and the eggs, and the Vietnamese restaurant with the curious woman at the front, and the Saturday in this office, when all three of them had been in the same space, and it had felt like an arrangement rather than a coincidence. He thought about the fact that she ran a billion-dollar company, and he fixed routing parameters, and that she had 3 security people within a block at all times, and he drove a truck that needed new brake pads, and that none of this was simple or clean or convenient. I think about you outside of work too, he said, because it was true. And because the particular quality of her honesty, which he'd been watching since the morning she'd folded his blanket and told him her first name and stopped before her last, deserved the same thing back. She was still for a moment. Then she exhaled. Not dramatically, just a real breath. The kind you let out when you've been carrying something without realizing it. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. Neither of them moved toward anything. The moment didn't require it. There was something better in sitting with it. The acknowledgement, the honesty, the specific relief of 2 people who had been circling something choosing to look directly at it and finding that it didn't fall apart under the looking. It's complicated, Cole said. Very, Victoria agreed. We work together. We do. And he paused. The situation is not simple. No, she said. It's not. She looked at him. But I've tried the simple version my entire adult life. The version where everything is structured and predictable and the personal life is whatever's left over after the company is done with me. A pause. It's not actually simple. It's just empty. But Cole thought about the years since Lily's mother had left. The particular shape of a life organized entirely around work and a child. The efficiency of it. The way it had foreclosed on certain kinds of pain by foreclosing on everything adjacent to them. He understood what she was describing. He'd been living a version of it himself. We'd have to be careful, he said. I know, she said. I'm not suggesting we stop being careful. I'm suggesting we stop pretending we don't know what we know. He looked at her. Victoria Sterling, 30 years old, billion-dollar company, healing line on her forehead almost gone now, sitting in his visitor's chair on a Friday evening in March, because she hadn't quite been able to make herself leave. Lily is going to be insufferable about this, he said. Victoria laughed. A real one, the same unguarded kind from the sidewalk in December, and it did the same thing to her face. Lily already knows, she said. Lily is 7. Lily is perceptive, Victoria said. She gets it from somewhere. Cole couldn't argue with that either. The week after that conversation, nothing dramatic happened, which was perhaps the point. The work continued. The carrier reconciliation went to Janet on Monday. The Garfield account had its first successful delivery run under the new routing system, and Dwayne Garfield sent a brief email that said, simply, good start, which Brian printed out and put on the corkboard in the operations area, because Brian understood the value of evidence. Sasha presented her first formal quarterly analysis to the operations team and to Victoria, who had asked to attend not as CEO, but as an interested party, and sat in the back of the conference room and listened without interrupting, which was the highest form of respect Sasha had been given in 18 months, and which showed on her face in the particular way respect showed on people who hadn't received enough of it. Victoria did not interrupt, but afterwards, in the hallway, she stopped Sasha and said something Cole wasn't close enough to hear. And Sasha Reyes walked back to her desk with the expression of someone recalibrating what she thought was possible. Cole noticed this and said nothing, which was the right thing to do. On a Saturday in late March, he and Lily walked to the Mercer Street building. Not their building anymore, in the old sense. They still lived there, in the same apartment, but the building itself belonged to everyone in it now, which was a different kind of ownership. The resident cooperative had held 2 board meetings. Mrs. Okonkwo, from the second floor, whose cooking smells had been a landmark of Cole's time in the building, was the board chair. She had, by her own account, opinions about the boiler situation that she intended to act on. They stood on the sidewalk outside the building and looked at it the way you looked at something familiar that had changed in a way you couldn't quite see but could feel. Lily was holding Gerald the elephant. "It looks the same," she said. "It is the same," Cole said. "Mostly. But different." "Yeah." She looked at the building and then at her father. "We're staying, right?" "For a while," Cole said. "Yeah." She nodded slowly, the way she nodded when she was accepting something that was more complex than she had full language for. "Good," she said. "I like it here. I like Mrs. Okonkwo." "Mrs. Okonkwo likes you," Cole said. This was an understatement. Mrs. Okonkwo had taken one look at Lily 6 months ago and decided she was her personal responsibility, and she had been quietly supplying Lily with food and opinions and life advice ever since. Lily looked at him with the dark, steady eyes. "Dad?" "Yeah." "Are you happy?" He thought about the honest answer, not the parent answer, not the everything is fine answer, the actual honest one. "Getting there," he said. She considered this. "Okay," she said. "That's a good answer." She tucked Gerald more securely under her arm. "Better than fine." They walked home. It was the kind of spring evening Cleveland occasionally produced in late March. Cold still, but with a quality underneath the cold that was different from January's cold, something less absolute, something that suggested the season was making up its mind. The light lasted until almost 7 now, the early dark of winter retreating in increments the way bad things retreated, slowly, and then all at once. Cole Harrison walked home with his daughter on a Saturday evening in March and thought about what it meant to arrive somewhere. Not the dramatic version of arrival, not the movie version with the swelling music and the clean resolution, the real version. The version where things had been genuinely hard and then they'd changed, not because of luck or generosity or a single decisive moment, but because of an accumulation of choices. His choices, other people's choices. Choices made under pressure, and choices made from conviction, and choices made at midnight in a frozen ravine with no time to think about them at all. He thought about the 73 names on Victoria's handwritten list, including his own. He thought about the families who'd come back and the ones who hadn't. He thought about Dennis Park above the laundromat, and Brian Okafor's color-coded database, and Sasha Reyes's 11 ignored memos. He thought about the way justice, in the real world, didn't arrive all at once. It arrived in pieces, partial, incomplete. Some parts coming through clearly, and others getting lost in the machinery. And the work was to keep pushing for the pieces that were still outstanding, rather than declaring victory on the ones that had landed. He thought about Victoria saying, "I'm not suggesting we stop being careful." He thought about Lily on the sidewalk saying she likes you with the absolute authority of a person who had not yet learned to doubt what she clearly saw. He thought about 9 degrees and frozen metal and the particular cold of headlights at the wrong angle, and the 3 seconds it had taken him to put on his coat and go outside. He thought that if he had that night to live again, knowing everything, knowing who was in the car, knowing what her company's name was on the notice on his door, knowing the full complicated tangle of what would come after, he would put on the coat again. Not because it had worked out, because there had been a person in trouble and he'd been the person who could help. And that equation didn't change regardless of what you knew about the edges of it. Some things, he thought, were just simple, not easy. Simple. Lily slipped her hand into his as they walked, the way she did sometimes without comment, and Cole held on. The city around them went about its business. The lights came on in the apartments above the street. Someone was cooking something good somewhere nearby. A bus went past, mostly empty, the driver visible through the glass with the specific patient expression of someone doing a job that required showing up regardless of what the weather was doing. Cole Harrison walked home with his daughter, and his life was not perfect, and it was not finished, and it was not simple, but it was his. Fully, solidly, genuinely his. And somewhere on the 39th floor of a glass building downtown, a woman who had learned something important about the distance between what looked like the right thing and what actually was the right thing was probably still in her office, doing the work, paying attention to the difference. That was enough. For now, and for a while, that was enough.